Pokémon, medicine and martial arts. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction, so don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 876, All-Out Gamble. Pikachu examined his body with curiosity. After confirming that it was still his own body and no parts were missing, he breathed a sigh of relief. Despite his previously nonchalant, all-too-easy Pokemon demeanor, even the smile on his lips made him seem charmingly charming and endearing. Pikachu was actually still deeply panicked. Natural lightning, after all, was no match for the force of nature. Having fully confirmed that there were no abnormalities within his body, Pikachu finally showed off his impressive skills. With another leap, Pikachu unleashed a 100,000-volt attack without reservation. Compared to the 100,000-volt attacks Pikachu had previously used in its prime and in its weakened state, this one was incredibly powerful. Lightning flashed around the attack, seemingly supporting it. Thunderclouds rolled down from the sky, and bolts of lightning occasionally slammed down around 100,000 volt. Pikachu's 100,000 volts was like a sharp sword ripping through the darkness of the sky. Within the shroud of darkness, a flash of lightning illuminated the previously dim space. The falling bolts of lightning also illuminated the panicked faces of the toucans. Big Mouth at this moment, even the strongest toucans felt a surge of heart-pounding power surge towards them. They tried to dodge, but Pikachu's attacks were too swift, and since they were all huddled together, it was too late to retreat. Several of the stronger toucans immediately flew to the front, creating a protective barrier for their companions. Rays of orange energy gathered in the beaks of the toucans flying towards the front row, and the faint flickering light illuminated the determined expressions on their faces. They fought tooth and nail, even if it meant getting hurt themselves, to ensure the safety of their offspring. The toucans, who had been leading the charge and evolving after being hit by a rock thrown by Ash, had long since vanished. It was probably hiding among the toucans, trembling in fear. Because the 100,000-volt surge had arrived so quickly, the toucans' gathering strength didn't last long. They all fired the destruction beams from their beaks at top speed, hoping to withstand the powerful 100,000-volt surge. But it's true that the destruction beam is truly one of the more common yet powerful skills among all the others. Even though it was launched in a hurry and had a short range, the energy and power it packed into it were not to be underestimated. Especially since it wasn't just a single destruction beam, but several fused together. Its power must have been multiplied several times over. And feeling the immense power of his own destruction beam, combined with that of his companions, he felt the immense energy and power generated by the fusion of his own destruction beam and that of his companions. A few of the toucans felt a slight sense of relief. After all, while the enemy's 100,000 volts was immensely powerful and its noise intimidating, their destruction time wasn't any less effective. Furthermore, while they were restrained by electric-type skills, the destruction beam they unleashed was a normal-type skill. Therefore, facing the 100,000 volts, the destruction beam wouldn't be at a disadvantage. Filled with hope, the toucan's destruction beam quickly collided with a powerful 100,000 volts. A billowing blast of air erupted from the collision and explosion. This was a difficult situation for the more powerful toucans who had initially been holding the front line. The surging blast of air buffeted the toucans from both sides. Even though they were skilled soarers, the powerful force of the blast made them sway. Under normal circumstances, the toucans, especially the more powerful ones, wouldn't have cared. But now, after using their destruction beam, the toucans were also suffering from the negative effects, temporarily immobilizing themselves. Consequently, the toucans, who had been leading the charge, hoping to block the damage, now became the very ones they were protecting. Immobilized, the toucans in the lead fell backwards, tumbling into the toucans behind them. Caught off guard, the toucans behind them suffered greatly. Some, losing their balance, were even knocked from the sky, slamming heavily to the ground. If even the larger toucans, with their considerable endurance, could be in such a state, wouldn't the smaller Pikachu be even more vulnerable to the surging winds? In reality, Pikachu was quite foresighted. While confident in the 100,000 volts he had just unleashed, he wasn't overly arrogant. especially after seeing the blasts of destructive death beams, combined into a single, destructive death beam. He'd already made up his mind and, with foresight, immediately dropped to the ground. No matter how violent a blasts of air, Pikachu's short limb seemed rooted to the ground, barely shifting back a few centimeters as the wind ripped through his fur. Consequently, Pikachu was often the first to react after the blast subsided. This was especially true because the toucan's previous impact had delayed some of their higher-tier fighters' ability to react. This allowed Pikachu to strike first. Pikachu was remarkably decisive. Seeing this as a golden opportunity to press home the victory, he immediately, without the slightest hesitation, mobilized all the electricity within his body to begin concentrating his next attack, the 100,000-volt attack. While it was called concentrating, for a Pikachu who had practically fused the 100,000-volt attack into his bones, ready to unleash it instantly at any moment, it only took a breath or two. Chapter 877 Phoenix King. Although it was called concentrated energy, for Pikachu, who had fused the 100,000-volt skill into his very bones, ready to unleash it instantly at any moment, it took only a breath or two. He quickly channeled the power of the 100,000-volt skill into his body, unleashing a fierce attack on the still unresponsive toucans. The 100,000-volt power completely enveloped the toucans, sending screams cascading down their spines. As Pikachu continued to pump energy, the electricity within his body continued to pour out, swarming towards the toucans. As the power continued to flow, Pikachu's stored energy gradually dwindled, until it was practically depleted. Yet, despite this, Pikachu refused to give up. With unwavering determination, he watched the toucans, who had dared to bully him and his master, flee in panic, their bottoms drenched in sweat. Thunderclouds rolled in the sky. Just as the sky cleared after a rainstorm, Pikachu, having exhausted the last of its energy, saw the dark clouds in the sky, mirroring the scene within Pikachu at that moment. The sun began to shine, revealing a clear sky. The rolling thunderclouds vanished, leaving behind only a flock of toucans, long since incapacitated. As the drizzle subsided, a rainbow bridge of colors appeared in the distant sky. As if everything was finally getting better, Ash's aching body inexplicably felt a slight improvement, at least allowing him to stand. As Ash climbed back to his feet, Pikachu had already collapsed. At that moment, Pikachu was truly exhausted, having been completely exhausted. However, Ash was quick to act and quickly scooped Pikachu up into his arms. "Pikachu, are you okay? How are you?" Ash asked, his voice filled with concern. Pikachu facing his master's concerned gaze, Pikachu, though looking exceptionally frail, still managed a cheerful smile, urging his master not to worry. Just then, the sound of birdsong rang out, and a figure slowly flew across the distant horizon, heading towards the other side, the direction of the rainbow. Because the figure appeared within Ash and Pikachu's sight, they quickly caught its eye. Just one Pokémon, soaring gracefully over their heads, exuding a sacred and noble aura. It was a Pokémon similar to a phoenix or peacock. Its feathers were mostly gold and red, with a yellow tail, white on the underside of its body, and green on the tips of its wings. Ho-Oh had a green neck stripe, a yellow beak, and black eye sockets surrounding its red eyes. A yellow feather crest graced its head. Ho-Oh's wings were prismatic, creating a rainbow behind it as it flew. Its legs are black, with long claws split into 4 toes. If you or Professor Oak were to see this Pokémon right now, they would surely exclaim in amazement. For the Pokémon before them is none other than the legendary Ho-Oh. Legend has it that the Phoenix possesses the magical power to resurrect the dead, and wherever Ho-Oh flies, a rainbow forms. Legend has it that anyone who sees Ho-Oh will find eternal happiness. Legend has it that before the Burning Tower, formerly the Scorched Tower, burned down, Ho-Oh rested atop Bale Tower. It's speculated that Ho-Oh has since soared through the Pokémon world, seeking pure-hearted Pokémon trainers. Whether these legends are true or not remains to be seen. Meanwhile, Ash, determined to meet Pokémon from around the world and become the world's greatest Pokémon Master. Encountering an unfamiliar Pokémon would immediately lead him to pull out his Pokédex and begin investigating, hoping to learn more about the Pokémon soaring above. Ash, however, was disappointed to learn that after much research, the Pokédex only revealed that there was no information available, and that there were still many undiscovered Pokémon to explore. These irrelevant voice prompts were driving Ash crazy. It turned out that the Pokédex Professor Oak had given to Ash and Xiaomao was originally the Pokémon delivered to trainers during their travels. It hadn't been upgraded to include every Pokédex in the world. It only contained Pokémon from the Kanto region. What kind of Pokémon is this? It's so beautiful, Pikachu. Ash stared at it for a moment, then reacted and shook his head. Never mind, whatever Pokémon it is, Pikachu. The most important thing now is getting you to the Pokémon Center. Hopefully, when we've grown stronger, we'll meet him again. Then we'll definitely challenge this Pokémon and make him our partner. Just as Ash was making these ambitious promises, a colorful feather slowly drifted down from the sky on the gentle breeze. Whether it was a coincidence, or perhaps it was meant to be, the rainbow feather floated directly in front of Ash, Pikachu, and the others. Could this be the feather from that Pokémon? It's a truly valuable item. We need to save it. Ash examined the rainbow feather for a moment, but without finding anything useful, he put it away. Let this feather serve as a witness between us. I hope we can meet again someday. Ash said this, facing the rainbow, where the Pokémon had disappeared. He turned around, carrying Pikachu, and was about to hop on the bicycle seat he'd snatched from Misty to take the injured Pikachu to the Pokémon Center in Viridian City for treatment. However, before he could take a few steps, he froze. The sight before him was truly disorienting. What the hell? This? The bicycle was still sitting there, fine. How did it end up like this? This is just a bummer. Chapter 878 ending. What the hell is going on? Wasn't my bike just sitting here, fine? How did it end up like this? This is ridiculous, Ash screamed, panicked and anxious. He was panicking about the pile of scrap metal before him. That was the bike he'd gotten from Misty. Just as Ash was frantic over Misty's bike being dragged down and reduced to scrap, neither Ash nor Pikachu noticed that a pair of eyes suddenly flickered in the shadows beneath their feet. Those eyes were like those of a newborn baby, curious about everything around them. But after hearing Ash's cry again, it retreated back into the shadows like a startled deer. Even its eyes, which had been barely visible, were now completely hidden. Never mind, never mind. Pikachu, wait for me. I'll get you to the Pokémon Center right now and let Miss Joy nurse you back to health. Ash shook his head in annoyance, not caring if his injuries would affect anything else. He immediately broke into a run. As for whether Ash would get lost or even recognize the way, for a passionate young man like Ash, it was better to take the initiative than to wait. Besides, where there were roads, there were definitely people, and where there were people, there were definitely things to treat Pokémon. Ash was running in the direction of the rainbow's birthplace. Running towards the brilliant rainbow, Ash and his friend's future seemed like it was filled with boundless hope. Shortly after Ash and Pikachu left, Misty, who had caught up from behind, finally arrived. Her running speed couldn't match Ash's bicycle speed. Even with a toucan attack midway, they still managed to barely reach the scene of the accident. As she passed the flocks of unconscious toucans, Misty was extremely cautious, her pace deliberately slowing to a crawl. She had already recognized the fallen toucans, the same ones that had attacked Ash and Pikachu. What's going on with these toucans? They're all lying there, incapacitated. Especially since they smell like they're burning. They smell so good. Despite her cautious and light steps, Misty couldn't help but murmur softly at the sight. She couldn't help but take in the aroma wafting through the air. A look of ecstasy crossed her face. However, this expression froze as she caught sight of something. She reflected a pitch-black object, almost like scrap metal, but its appearance clearly revealed it to be a bicycle. Isn't this my bicycle? How did it become like this? Did Ash just ride it off? In a split second, 3 consecutive questions raced through Xiaoxia's mind. As for how Xiaoxia recognized the nearly shattered, charcoal black bicycle before her as hers, it was simply because it was her beloved bike, a bike she'd saved up countless hours of pocket money to buy. She'd even know it even if it crumbled to dust. It was actually because he'd made a unique marking on it, and even after Pikachu's 100,000 volt wreckage, the markings were still there. Xiaoxia couldn't help but smile at the wreckage, but it was a cold smile, and a blazing rage smoldered in her eyes. Anyone who saw this would probably shudder. You would have retreated from the scene. And if Amateur knew about this, he'd probably just pat Xiaozhi on the shoulder, say, follow your own path, and quietly leave the battlefield. Ash, I'm not done with you. If I don't teach you a lesson and avenge my bicycle, I won't believe you. Misty's dragon roar echoed through the forest, scaring away countless bird Pokémon and sending even weaker wild Pokémon scurrying about. If Pikachu were here, he'd probably sigh, It's my fault. Who could have blamed his abilities for being so powerful under the influence of lightning? He'd simply activated his ultimate, and because the power within him was so overwhelming, he lost control and accidentally damaged the bicycle. Who could have known it would turn out like this? Region dividing line, two flowers bloom, each with its own beauty. At this moment, Yu, far away in Kalos, was of course unaware of all the events that Ash had just experienced during his recent trip. Although he'd heard from Professor Oak and the others about Ash, Shinobi, and the others' trip, he'd been so busy recently that he hadn't had time to contact them. Furthermore, because of their erratic schedules and locations, contacting them was extremely difficult. Yu decided to find a time to contact them again. He didn't have time for that right now. He had already returned to the Pokémon Center, carrying a flaming ball containing Moltres, and had Miss Joy treat him. He then led the uninjured Pokémon back to the Pokémon Center's backyard to resume their training. Air and Serena, having already qualified for the Pokémon show competition, weren't idle either. They each began training with their own Pokémon. After all, they'd been so busy lately with Moltres and Yu's affairs that they'd missed out on their Pokémon show training. They needed to catch up quickly, catching up on any missed training sessions. Xiaoxu was a bit of a peculiar situation at the moment. Her Pokémon breeder level was already very high, making further progress difficult. Therefore, she was simply caring for the Pokémon that weren't competing and were watching from the sidelines. Chapter 879 Superpower Cat. Yu, this should be the 7th gym, right? Yes, it's the 7th gym. Once I get this 7th gym badge, I'll only need one more to qualify for the Kalos Regional League Pokémon battle. In that case, then you must do your best. I've heard the gym trainer at the Bike gym is no pushover, a tough one? Isn't that perfect? Let them see what our new teammate's power is like. Standing at the entrance of the Bike gym, Yu, Xiaozu, and the other two girls were as relaxed as they had been before any previous gym challenges. Facing the upcoming gym, far from feeling the slightest bit of nervousness, they seemed completely relaxed and joyful. This was perhaps due to the addition of Moltres, a high-powered divine beast. After all, with Moltres' addition, Yu's Pokémon's power had significantly increased. Just in terms of power levels, there are already 2 Pokémon that have reached the elite level. And the power of these 2 cannot be ignored. Other strong Pokémon like Pichu and Suicune are also approaching elite level, they simply lack the opportunity. At this moment, they stood at the gym entrance, admiring its unique architecture and majestic facade. Speaking of which, the style of the 100-era gym is truly unique. Yu was clearly more interested in the gym's architecture than in the upcoming gym battle. Indeed, that's true. It's like it's made of crystal, so beautiful. I heard this building was very famous in the 100-era period. They were built according to a sundial. It's said it's been here for a long time. But I don't know exactly what it was used for. As a native of Kalos, Air had some understanding of these things. It's a sundial. Yu was immediately a little bored upon hearing it. After all, such things were quite common in China. They just weren't as fancy as the buildings before him. Alright, everyone, hurry in. We can't keep them waiting. Besides, if we finish early, we can still make it to dinner tonight, which can also be a celebration. That being said, I heard the trainer at the Bake Gym is a formidable opponent. Rumor has it he even has the ability to predict the future. Is that really possible? Seeing Yu's completely nonchalant and confident demeanor, Serena couldn't help but share the information she had helped gather. That way, wouldn't it be even more interesting? The stronger the opponent, the faster we can improve our strength. With that, Yu led the way inside, his fighting spirit growing stronger as he advanced. But don't be fooled by the sundial's garish exterior. Inside, a hidden gem unfolds. Upon entering, Yu seemed unimpressed by the garish architecture. Following the staff's guidance, he quickly found the gym trainer for the Bake Gym. However, upon entering, Yu was immediately stunned by the scene before him. Not only him, but even Serena and the other 2 were equally stunned. The reason for such astonishment? It was because the woman they saw was floating in midair, yes, several meters off the ground. Furthermore, Yu's keen eyesight failed to detect any wire props surrounding her. Another thing that struck Yu was the woman's unusual attire, reminiscent of a legendary prophet. Also, 2 Pokémon, like her, were floating in the air. After watching such a Pokémon, Yu wasn't quite as surprised. He even looked at the woman with a thoughtful expression. What kind of Pokémon are these 2? Why can they float? Xiaoxu, In a rare move, asked first. After all, while she was more knowledgeable, she wasn't from the Kalos region, and most of the Pokémon she knew were unique to the Kanto region. Hearing Xiaoxi's slightly puzzled question, Air glanced at Yu, who was lost in thought, before answering without hesitation. These two Pokémon are Mutuo. What kind of Pokémon is Mutuo that can transform into two different forms? That's quite amazing. Xiaoxi's eyes flickered with wonder as she watched the two Pokémon with the same name but completely different appearances floating overhead. It was truly rare to see Pokémon with the same name but different appearances. Despite Xiaoxi's surprise, Air explained, a male psyche is primarily indigo with some white, the female's coloring is the opposite. Females have curly ears, ruffs, and tails, while males have straight ones. Males have blue eyes with olive-shaped, green pupils, females have yellow eyes with red pupils, and semicircular eyes. The indigo parts of a heterochromatic psyche fade to pale yellow. Serena then took out her Pokédex and scanned it. The Pokédex's electronic synthesized voice blared, Psyche, the suppression Pokémon. Upon sensing danger, it opens its ears and unleashes a psychic power capable of crushing a 10-ton truck. Males and females have different appearances. Air's explanation was identical to the Pokédex, and she also learned that Psyche was a psychic-type Pokémon. After learning that these two Pokémon are both psychic-type, the people who were originally surprised no longer looked surprised. Chapter 880 Jejihu. After all, you have to know that most psychic-type Pokémon have the bug of telekinesis. And telekinesis isn't just for psychic Pokémon, even humans can use it. Of course, those few possess this skill, only a small minority. This is precisely the special group of people, aside from warriors, who often possess this innate talent. Unlike warriors, even an ordinary person can achieve the level of a warrior through physical refinement. Typically, psychic-type Pokémon that can use telekinesis will envelop themselves in telekinesis and float in midair. This not only strengthens their own telekinesis power, but also makes it easier to target Pokémon that excel at mental power over physical strength. Some people, looking to show off, will even have a psychic-type Pokémon envelop them in telekinesis, experiencing the thrill of floating off the ground and walking. After seeing through all this, Yu lost interest in everything before him. Based on what he'd observed and understood, Yu was now absolutely certain that the gym in front of him specialized in psychic-type Pokémon. Psychic-type Pokémon like these were often decorated in a rather eerie manner, creating a strange atmosphere. While it was unclear whether the woman before him had manifested herself on her own or with the help of the telekinesis of the two psychic muse, Yu was certain of one thing: this was likely another gym trainer with a powerful secondary class. Seriously, all these good gym trainers were doing these bizarre things instead of being good ones. Instead of wasting their time, they should be thinking about how to improve their strength. After all, if they didn't improve their strength, then the challenge would be meaningless, with no sense of accomplishment at all. Yu couldn't help but grumble inwardly. However, despite Yu's quizzical expression, the staff member who had brought him in, as well as his son and daughters, were extremely respectful to the woman before him. "Teacher, a challenger has arrived. Is this the distinguished guest you mentioned earlier?" The staff member before him was clearly a student apprenticing with a woman. He was extremely respectful to the woman before him, and inquired out of curiosity. Since yesterday, his teacher had predicted that a distinguished guest would arrive today, and had therefore sent him to wait outside early. However, he waited all morning without seeing the guest, and unexpectedly, the challenger only appeared in the late afternoon. Because the Kalos League's badge qualification tournament was nearing its end, the number of trainers challenging the gym would not increase, but rather decrease. After all, if one was capable, they would have already secured a badge long ago, so there was no need to waste time. Therefore, today, he only waited for trainer Yu. "Yu, you need to show some respect to Miss Jejihu. You know, besides being an excellent Pokemon gym trainer, Miss Jejihu is also a renowned prophet. I've seen her mentioned on TV and in albums before." Seeing Yu's unconcerned expression, Serena, who is well informed about local news and current events, couldn't help but tug at the hem of Yu's clothes and whisper a warning. However, facing her student's question, Jejihu didn't even respond. Her entire body was shrouded in a large robe, which, due to its use of training ground to float in the air, wouldn't move without wind. However, this very presence gave him an eerie feeling. Like a controlled, floating, sunny doll. Especially his somewhat vacant eyes, staring straight ahead. It was unclear what he was looking at. But once his eyes met, it was as if he could see into one's future or past, making it difficult to look him in the eye. At this moment, Jejiho's gaze was fixed on Yiyu and the group who had just entered. Or, more accurately, on Yiyu. Yiyu felt a bit uncomfortable being stared at like that, and he tried to turn his head several times, but for some reason, his eyes met theirs. As if accustomed to her teacher's indifference, the female student and staff member, who didn't respond to her teacher's questioning, didn't seem embarrassed at all. Instead, she introduced them to Yiyu and his group. As you can see, this person is none other than my teacher, and also a gym trainer at the Bake Gym. He's also a formidable prophet. The young staff member, upon hearing her teacher mention that her teacher was also a trainer, seemed particularly proud, even puffing out her slightly flat chest. And you, a sudden, loud shout emanated from the gym trainer, Jejiho, who was floating in the air. This sudden arrival startled everyone. Pikachu, perched on Yiyu's shoulder, curiously surveying the surroundings, was nearly startled and slipped, falling off. Fortunately, Pikachu's quick reaction, grabbing the creature tightly, saved the day. However, Pikachu looked up curiously at the source of the sudden big brother voice, observing the gym trainer, whose attire and demeanor seemed strange. As Pikachu slowly raised its head, its curious gaze met Jejiho's eyes that seemed to see into the future and the past. The future I just saw was about you and Pikachu. This sudden statement, seemingly out of context, stunned everyone present and drew their gazes. After all, Yiyu was the only Pikachu present. And as the main character, he was undoubtedly the subject of much discussion. How could this not attract the attention of everyone present, waiting for Jejiho's next words? Chapter 881 Pikachu. The future of me and Pikachu. Yiyu, the protagonist of the conversation, seemed stunned, but his curiosity only intensified. He desperately wanted to know what the future held for him and Pikachu. Pikachu, startled, opened his mouth slightly, his eyes equally filled with curiosity. He instinctively wanted to see his master's expression. But the next moment, as their eyes met, a smile of tacit understanding emerged. However, the awaited sequel never materialized. Floating in midair, Jejiho's gaze remained fixed on Pikachu. Through Pikachu's eyes, locked with its own, despite the curiosity in them, Jejiho saw a flame-like energy burning within Pikachu, its glow growing ever more intense. Through the faint light, Jejiho could clearly see, through his eyes, scenes of Pikachu's past. There were scenes of Pikachu hatching, of Pikachu and Yiyu's first acquaintance. There were also scenes of Pikachu and Yiyu's bond and tacit understanding formed over their years together. There were also scenes of Pikachu's past battles with other Pokémon. There were also scenes of Pikachu and Yiyu, the trainer, cheering each other on and fighting for each other. Young man, I understand that your Pikachu has always been a Pokémon with a troubled fate. Yiyu was somewhat bewildered after hearing this profound term. Pika is for Pikachu. It was still resting on Yiyu's shoulder, its eyes wide open, and it was unclear whether it had understood Jejiho's words. What on earth does this mean? Serena was equally bewildered, looking puzzledly at Air, the more knowledgeable and experienced of the three women. But she was ultimately disappointed. Air, in her own innocence, saw Serena's yearning eyes and shook her head helplessly, expressing her complete lack of answers. It's very different from other Pokémon, very different? What do you mean? Yiyu hadn't realized he'd been carried away by Jejiho's words. Pikachu's face was also filled with confusion, puzzled as to how he had become the unique Pokémon this gym trainer had described. Pikachu, in contrast, considered himself quite ordinary, the only difference being that he'd found a trainer who treated him so well. They had long since cultivated an unbreakable bond, so much so that under certain circumstances, they seemed indistinguishable from one another. But at this moment, Yiyu's subconscious question caught Pikachu's eye once again. Hey, Pikachu, what's so special about you? You haven't been hiding it from me for so long, have you? Come on, tell me now and make me happy, have fun. Yiyu gave Pikachu a blaming look, as if to say, Pikachu, if you're hiding something from me, tell me now, share it with me, and I'll let it go. Pika faced with his trainer's sudden eccentricity, Pikachu gave him a sullen look. As they were both familiar with each other, Pikachu knew that his trainer was probably being naughty again. However, Pikachu was very cooperative, shaking his head, indicating that he knew nothing and asked not to ask. He was innocent too, okay? Alright, I'll give you this thing away at noon. Your strength hasn't improved much, but your acting has definitely improved. Put away that innocent expression, it's disgusting. Pikachu couldn't let his trainer wrong him like that, and he immediately resented it. Well, the serious scene that followed was a complete disaster. And then, Pikachu longs for something deeper. As if oblivious to what was happening before him, Jijiho continued to speak to herself, without a trace of embarrassment. Something deeper. Damn it, Pikachu, are you still longing for something? Tell me now. It makes me seem like I'm mistreating you and abusing you. Pika. Although he was completely confused, unsure of what this deeper desire was, Pikachu wasn't happy with his trainer's words and immediately retorted. I call it love. As Jijiho said this, the unwavering affection on her face finally showed a subtle change, her once tense expression softening slightly. However, Yu, upon hearing this, seemed unfazed, curling his lips and continuing his bickering with Pikachu. Tisk, I was just wondering what was going on. So, Pikachu, you're in need of love. If you were, you could have told me earlier. I'm in need of everything, but I don't need love. Other trainers look down on you and despise you, but I, your trainer, love you. Love is something I'll give you as much as I can. Yu seemed particularly unyielding at this moment. While he spoke these words, anything concerning his own Pokémon, or those around him, would become especially attentive, silently taking note of everything. Love, unnoticed by anyone, Yu lowered his head slightly and muttered to himself, his gaze flickering as if he were thinking something. Honestly, Yu actually didn't believe in fate at all, because he only believed that fate was in his own hands. As long as he became strong enough, not only his own fate would be in his own hands, but the fate of others would also be in his hands. As for love, that was even more nonsense. At least the word love didn't have much of a positive effect on Yu. Chapter 882, Reaching the Peak. The word love had long since become unfamiliar to Yu. After all, he'd once roamed the Jianghu, a place where everything existed except love. In the treacherous world of Jianghu, even the slightest show of kindness and compassion often ended badly. Don't ask why Yu said this, it was because he'd experienced it before. He didn't want to relive those painful memories, let alone recall them. Therefore, the love Jijiho spoke of seemed so strange to Yu. Yet, for some reason, he knew in his heart that he didn't have the concept of love. His emotion surfaced. Yet, for some reason, when he heard Jijiho utter the word, scenes began to flash through Yu's mind. These were scenes from his time with his Pokémon, his first encounters with them, his first captures, and the battles they won under his command. There were also scenes of him and his Pokémon encouraging each other and overcoming difficulties together. Furthermore, because of the connections between Pokémon, Yu encountered countless trainers and Pokémon. Recalling these memories, especially the flashes of images, Yu's eyes involuntarily glanced at the three women standing on either side of him, and a seemingly happy and cheerful smile appeared on his lips. As he smiled, Yu suddenly felt as if he had a sudden enlightenment. Love, does it mean the love I have for my Pokémon? And the love my Pokémon have for me? At this moment, Yu seemed to have entered his own world of enlightenment, completely shutting out everything around him. The scenes that had previously flashed through his mind were repeated again. Yes, it's probably because of love. Think about who I was back then. If it weren't for Pikachu's company, who knows what I'd be like now, and Pikachu and I made a promise to grow stronger together, to become incredibly strong, strong enough to protect those we care about. We'll take complete control of our own destiny. Yu experienced much in his spiritual world. But in the outside world, it was only a fleeting moment, and even those standing nearby didn't notice the unusual expression on his face. Only Jijiho, floating in the air, watched Yu and the Pikachu on his shoulder the entire time. And at some point, Pikachu lay motionless on Yu's shoulder. The look on Pikachu's face suggested he was lost in thought. Jijiho smiled meaningfully upon seeing this, and didn't pause for Pikachu and Yu's current state. He continued to recount what he had seen and perceived from the future. They say 1 day in heaven is equal to 1 year on earth. But the same is true of the human mind. If a year passes in the mind's realm, only 1 day should pass in the real world outside. Yu and Pikachu didn't know why they were caught up in such a strange feeling. But in that strange feeling, they seemed to be able to sense each other's thoughts. It seemed as if a long time had passed, but in the outside world, it was only a few words from Jijiho. Yu and Pikachu woke up at the same time, and the moment they woke up, they subconsciously looked at each other again with tacit understanding. Ms. Jijihua, please tell us what you foresee about us in the future. Yu didn't dare to underestimate the woman before him. After all, being a Pokemon gym trainer meant someone had to be quite capable, especially one with a unique subclass. I saw you and Pikachu reach the summit together. Jijihua's voice was full of energy. And everyone present heard it clearly. However, in contrast to the rest of the group, Yu was incredibly interested in this so-called pinnacle. He then began to question, Miss Jijihua, Pikachu and I have reached the pinnacle together, but where is this pinnacle? Is this pinnacle you're talking about, the pinnacle of our strength, reaching the pinnacle of this world's power, or is it simply the championship of this Kalos Regional League tournament? Or is it, at this moment, Yu's mind seemed to be filled with questions, like a barrage of questions. However, facing Yu's barrage of questions, Jijihua remained remarkably calm, not a trace of panic. His expression remained unchanged as he spoke. You can only find the answer to the ultimate pinnacle on your own. But I believe you and Pikachu already have the answer in your hearts by now. Jijihua seemed to have just come back to his senses, having just regained consciousness from a momentary glimpse into the future and the past. His expression finally changed, its usual expression unchanged, but now filled with a hint of enthusiasm and profound meaning. He waved his hand, as if reminding Yu to seize the next opportunity, because only in his own hands could all this be possible. Let's reach the top together? Pikachu, this is the promise we made at the beginning, do you remember? Yu didn't get the answer he wanted, and although he felt a little disappointed, he still spoke these incoherent words. However, the next moment, Pikachu and Yu were actually responding to each other. Pika, it seems we encountered some trouble back then. Since then, we seem to have both longed for greater power. Because only with great power can we overcome difficulties, reach the top, and be less vulnerable to bullying. Pikachu was now extremely excited, shouting loudly, nodding his head repeatedly, as if he fully agreed with what Yu said. If one could see the color in Pikachu's eyes at this moment, they would definitely see what was in them. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 883 Target. If you could see the color in Pikachu's eyes right now, you'd surely see what's lingering within them. What exactly is that lingering within them? Yes, we promised to grow stronger together, to stand at the top of the world together. But now, it seems our promise is changing. Yu, ignoring the bewildered expressions of the crowd, spoke with such a perplexing statement. Even Pikachu was momentarily stunned, completely confused about his trainer. What was going on? Facing their bewildered expressions, Yu quickly delivered his answer. Pikachu, this time, we're not just going to stand at the top of the world, we're going to take Suicune and the others with us, too. After all, we're allies fighting side by side. Pikachu After his initial gaze, Pikachu seemed incredibly excited, nodding his head repeatedly. And as if sensing what was happening outside, the Pokeball on Yu's waist trembled slightly. Yu said it before, pursuing dreams with Pokemon? Serena thought to herself, watching Yu through the crowd, who, like Pikachu, exuded a confident expression. The emotion in his gaze was one of joy and clarity. Then let's first obtain 8 gym badges, qualifying for the Kalos Regional Pokemon Tournament, reaching the pinnacle. Then, we'll win the Kalos League Pokemon Battle Tournament, becoming the next pinnacle. Finally, we'll return home and compete in the International Pokemon League Tournament, achieving the final pinnacle. Yu's stated goal was crystal clear, each pinnacle was merely a small, incremental step. Pikachu's emotion seemed to have been stirred, and he seemed quite excited. Alright, enough rambling. Miss Jijihua, I'm Yu, the challenger from China. Please accept the gym battle. With gym badges at stake, Yu seemed eager to complete his goals as quickly as possible. Challenger Yu, huh? Then, come on, I accept your challenge. With that, both sides began to consciously take their positions in the command area of the battlefield. It's unclear whether this was to emphasize their prestige or to make themselves the most impressive presence on the field. Even as the gym battle was about to begin, Jijihua's body, levitating from his training, remained suspended in midair. One of Jijihua's students, a staff member at Bake Gym, had already arrived outside the center of the battlefield and began to referee. She explained the rules of the Bake Gym battle to Yu. The rules of the Bake Gym Challenge are that each team sends out 2 Pokémon for a doubles battle. When both Pokémon of one team are incapacitated, the other team wins. Pokémon cannot be swapped during the battle. Yu, after battling in the previous 6 gyms, was no longer surprised by these seemingly unusual gym rules. He knew that each gym's trainer's goal was to test and assess the strength of their Pokémon trainers. Consequently, each gym had its own unique and distinctive battle methods and rules. He presumably believed that the doubles battle before him was Jijiho's style of gym battle. What should I do? I didn't expect the Bake Gym battle to be a doubles match. Yu hadn't seen him plan any strategies before. I'm afraid he's going to be at a disadvantage. Watching from the audience, Serena couldn't help but utter a note of concern. The truth was, while the rules might have been slightly different in previous gym battles, the fighting style was also somewhat different. But generally speaking, it was just that, sending out Pokémon one by one. When one side's Pokémon lost its ability to fight, the next Pokémon could be sent out to take over. The victory was achieved until the number of Pokémon limited by the rules were completely disabled. Because of this, everyone subconsciously assumed that this would be the same, just like in previous Taoist temples, with a one-on-one rotation. With this in mind, Yu didn't really care, even though he had made sufficient preparations and even researched online. But he still overlooked such an easily overlooked detail. It shouldn't be a problem. We have to trust Yu and Pikachu. After all, they're working so hard. Aer, though still a little uncertain, quickly offered comfort. Yu, Pikachu, keep going. Xiaoxu was much more direct, completely different from the usually delicate girl she seemed. After hearing the rules, Yu also felt deeply annoyed at his own carelessness. But after a brief moment, he stopped thinking about it. After all, if an enemy comes, we must fight. If water comes, we must block it. The world is often full of surprises, and many things don't go as planned. So, if something doesn't go as planned, wouldn't it be a sign of giving up? Yu couldn't easily do that. So, after just a brief moment of reflection, Yu had made up his mind. Pikachu, you'll rest and watch from the sidelines for this battle. Although Pikachu felt a little sorry for his trainer's order, he obediently retracted the steps he had taken. Yu had suddenly gained 2 Pokeballs in his hand. One was a fiery red, with faint traces of flames visible on it. What else could it be but the molters that Yu had just enjoyed that morning? The other was red and white, a perfectly ordinary Pokeball, also the most popular. For a moment, it was hard to guess which Pokemon were inside. Then let the gym trainers send out their Pokemon first. The voice of a girl outside the venue sounded at the right time. Chapter 884, Change of Tactics. Now, the gym trainers will send out their Pokemon first. A female voice from outside the arena chimed in at the perfect moment. Gorilla didn't hesitate, displaying the style of a Pokemon gym trainer to the fullest. Her body still hovered in midair, but as her robe swung behind her, her hands suddenly thrust forward. Then I'll send out these 2 children. As if she had known all along that her trainer would be sending them into battle, the 2 psyches that had been floating around Gorilla immediately, without a moment's hesitation, used their telekinesis to drag themselves swiftly into the battle arena, a form of sending out Pokemon. Then I'll leave the rest of the battle in your hands. Without any elaborate moves, Yu tossed the 2 Pokeballs directly into the arena. 2 crisp, ringing sounds echoed. 2 red lights were released from the bug Pokeball. When the red light completely dissipated, 2 powerful Pokémon appeared on the battlefield. Flame-ouch waves of scorching heat washed over, making one feel as if they were inside a volcano. The air seemed unable to withstand the heat radiating from the 2 Pokémon, but the seething battle spirit was so intense that for a moment, a white mist rose from the battlefield. These 2 Pokémon were Yu's 2 strongest Fire-type Pokémon, and were currently among the top 3 in the entire team. It seemed that Yu had already realized the difficulty of dealing with Psychic-type Pokémon. After all, those 2 Mewtwo were Psychic-type. And Psychic-type Pokémon are the most vulnerable of all Pokémon types. Their unpredictable attacks were almost omnipresent. Just using telekinesis alone was nearly impossible to defend against. Therefore, after seeing that Jijiho had sent out 2 Psychic-type Mewtwo, Yu was in awe. Yu also changed his previous battle plan. After all, his previous plan would likely be useless against these 2 Psychic-type Pokémon. He wasn't one for rigidity, and he didn't know how to adapt. So, he decisively resorted to Plan B. Why bother? I was originally planning to fight like a normal competitor and earn badges. But you insisted on forcing me to use my full strength? Since that's the case, I won't refuse. A look of resignation crossed Yu Yu's face. His idea was simple, to use his sheer power to defeat all the opponent's tactics. That's right, he intended to crush the opposing Pokemon with his sheer strength. After all, the strength of the gym trainers was undoubtedly far greater than that. Every gym had its own unique strengths. There were even near-champion Pokemon. But trainers, after all, only served to assess Pokemon trainers. It wasn't that they truly didn't want those trainers to earn gym badges. Otherwise, no one would be able to take a gym badge from a gym trainer. Even if there were, they would be incredibly powerful, but for novice trainers just starting out, it would be completely impossible. The challenge started with a hell-level difficulty. And most importantly, the gym trainers were at a disadvantage. It's unclear whether this was a collective agreement or a directive from the Alliance. Most gym trainers' Pokemon were typically no stronger than the Protoss level, at best peak Protoss. Furthermore, trainers were usually the first to send out their Pokemon. This allowed the challenging trainers to adjust their lineups accordingly. And the two Mews sent out by Jijiho were both Protoss level. Molten, Charizard. I'm leaving it up to you two this time. Yi Yu's face was filled with unprecedented confidence. Perhaps he had some uncertainty before, but once he sent out his two strongest Pokemon, it vanished. After all, these Pokemon were recently captured, so when faced with a battle, trainers usually send their most recently captured Pokemon out. This applies to both high-level and low-level trainers. Low-level trainers want to see how their newly captured Pokemon perform, giving them a rough idea of their abilities. High-level trainers, besides the aforementioned factors, primarily want to observe their newly captured Pokemon's condition. Yi Yu was no exception. As for why Charizard was sent out, aside from the aforementioned use of strength to defeat it, the most important factor was Yi Yu's previous promise to Charizard. He wanted to give it a chance to participate in the upcoming battle, and as a trainer of his word, he certainly had to keep his word. To elite-level Pokemon. It seems, young man, I underestimated you a little. A look of surprise finally crossed Jijiho's face, which had remained unchanged for millennia. More surprises are yet to come. This is just the beginning. And don't be too surprised by me, because what I'm going to do will astonish you for 3 days and 3 nights. Yi Yu said this in a cocky tone, his face unfailingly smug. It really surprised me. I didn't expect you to even possess the legendary Moltres. And if I'm not mistaken, your Charizard must have evolved. You're truly blessed. Jijiho ignored Yi Yu's boastful expression and sighed to herself. Since both sides have already sent out their Pokemon, the challenger will attack first. The referee, seemingly unable to bear their idle chatter, interrupted them out of professional ethics and announced the start of the match. Has it begun? In that case, Charizard uses Flame Jet and Moltres uses Flame Whirl. Without holding back, this was just the beginning. Yi Yu immediately ordered both Pokemon to unleash their signature moves. Chapter 885 Predicting the Future. Mediac used Dark Wave. As expected of gym trainers' Pokemon, their coordination was truly seamless. Although the trainer only gave one command, both Pokemon executed it without hesitation. None of the comical situations you'd see with a novice trainer trying to command two identical Pokemon simultaneously. The trainer didn't misjudge the other Pokemon simply because the other Pokemon was the same as their own. Without the slightest hesitation, the two Mediacs unleashed two Dark Waves, blocking the two flaming attacks. And surprisingly, they were able to block them. Gorilla didn't show the slightest bit of surprise that her Pokemon could block a move from a Pokemon of a higher power level. The orders continued to be issued. Excellent, young man. I've seen the strength you and your two Pokemon have displayed, but it's far from enough to earn a gym badge just like that. Psyche, show them and the Pokemon what you're made of. Use Future Sight. What's Future Sight? Yi Yu was momentarily stunned by the unfamiliar, rarely encountered skill term. But he didn't hesitate to take the next step, because simply standing there and taking a beating wasn't his nature. What's with Future Sight? Charizard, Moltres, go ahead. Don't let them underestimate you. Charizard, use Earth Throw. Moltres, use Wing Attack. It was the same old routine. Seeing that his ranged attacks weren't working, Yi Yu immediately switched to melee. Fortunately, Moltres' physique was inherently formidable, comparable to the Pokemon Yi Yu had trained with for so long, aside from its exceptionally high defense. This allowed me to perfectly coordinate with Yi Yu's sudden change of tactics. While the transition was still a bit choppy, It was still pretty good, considering it was just the first time getting used to each other. Facing two powerful Pokémon, they launched a fierce melee attack. The two Mews remained remarkably pale, showing no sign of panic, even as the distance between them grew closer. However, the two Mews wouldn't just stand there and let the two fire-type Pokémon slam into them. Using telekinesis, they controlled their bodies and executed a difficult evasive maneuver in the air. After watching the two Mews dodge their attacks, Moltres and Charizard showed no sign of discouragement. Instead, after Mews dodged their attacks, they circled in the air and prepared to attack again. But the next moment, the two Pokémon, who had seemed so aggressive just moments before, suddenly plummeted downwards, as if struck by a heavy blow. "What's going on? What's going on?" Yu immediately asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. But the next moment, he quickly realized that this was probably the effect of the so-called future sight skill. Although he had already formed some suspicions, Yu still seemed very worried and took out a Pokédex to scan and check. After confirming that his suspicions were correct, a serious look took over Yu's face. This future sight skill is really difficult to use. But there are ways to do it. After making up his mind, Yu looked at Moltres and Charizard, who had just pushed themselves up from the ground. "Molten, Charizard, are you two okay?" After shaking their heads to regain their composure, the two Pokémon shook their heads in response to their trainer's question. But now, their gazes were fixed on the two Mews. "Okay, if that's the case. Since melee isn't working, let's move on to ranged damage. Charizard, continue with Flame Jet, and Moltres, use Flame Vortex." Floating in midair, quietly observing the battle, Gargiho suddenly raised her face, her eyes gleaming with an unprecedented brilliance. "Meteor. Let them see our strength once again. Use Future Sight." Then, Wall of Light and Wave of Darkness. As Meteor repeated its trainer's orders, the two didn't panic at all, even though their names were the same. At that moment, Meteor, clearly described as male, suddenly blocked the way for Magnetic Meteor. At the same time, Meteor was intercepting a wall of transparent light. Charizard's attack arrived as expected, but when its Flame Jet hit the light, it seemed to have little effect. However, before Charizard could even register any surprise, Mewtwo and the others' retaliatory skills were almost ready. Waves of darkness flowed forth with impunity, swiftly unleashed by the female Mewtwo, protected by the male Mewtwo. Fortunately, however, Moltres' Flame Vortex followed suit. Although Moltres couldn't use its powerful fire barrier due to its surrounding companions, it was still sufficient for Moltres. It enveloped itself and the other Pokémon within its vortex of flames. Despite the darkness wave's barrage, Moltres' Flame Vortex merely cracked a few times, far from completely obliterating the flames. This was a good thing, as both Pokémon were fire type. Had a Pokémon of a different type been involved, the situation would have been quite different. Chapter 886 Clear. Boom boom boom. Waves of darkness seemed to be irritated by the inability to break through the defenses of the two Pokémon within. Explosions echoed continuously outside the Flame Vortex. While this barrage of attacks might have been manageable against other Pokémon, it was truly a headache for Moltres, a Pokémon known for its unconventional and defensive abilities. They had thought the situation was over, giving both sides time to regroup and resume the fight. However, things didn't go as planned. Even though the two Psyches seemed to have truly given up, halting their continuous darkness attacks, at that very moment, before even the simple barrier created by the Flame Vortex had dissipated, Moltres and Charizard felt a surge of concentrated force emanating from their bodies, and their bodies once again made close contact with the floor. A bystander sees clearly. As a trainer watching the entire process, Yu saw it all clearly. How could Moltres be able to defend against the opponent's Future Sight? The aftermath of this Future Sight attack was so sudden and unexpected, it caught everyone off guard, let alone the two Pokémon still at the center. Even Moltres believed its flame barrier would be able to withstand the attack from Future Sight. But it didn't go as planned. Future Sight easily penetrated the crude barrier of the swirling flames. It was as if it were equipped with a tracking device or a particle hopping device. It appeared out of nowhere, targeting the two Pokémon who were completely unprepared. Seeing his two Pokémon hit again, they fell heavily to the ground. After the loud noise, Yu couldn't help but feel anxious. The aftermath of these two Future Sight attacks was simply too much for Moltres and the others. This might have been a minor issue for a Pokémon fighting on the ground, but for a flying Pokémon like them, Such a sudden attack would be too much to handle. Even with a ground in contact, Charizard and Moltres were incredibly resilient. Even after being slammed to the ground, they didn't hesitate, ignoring the pain and immediately getting back up. Damn it. You forced us to do this. I'm going to use Big Bang, too. Charizard, use your Dragon Claws to suppress them. After confirming they were fine, Yu issued another order. It's useless. Psyche, use Predict the Future. Then use Dark Wave. No new skill names popped out of Jijihua's mouth. It was still the same familiar two moves. The moment the order was received, Charizard flapped its wings fiercely, its claws, gleaming with a cold emerald green light, poised to strike the female Psyche. After all, four fingers tend to pick on the softest, and this female Psyche seemed easier to bully. Seeing his companion in imminent danger, the male Psyche didn't hesitate, unconcerned about whether Moltres' poster would hide him, and quickly used telekinesis. He controlled the magnetic Psyche to dodge Charizard's attack. Facing the impending attack from Charizard, the female Psyche, having been rescued by the male Psyche, quickly used Dark Wave to strike Charizard, attempting to block it. Then, when the male Psyche was free, she also used Dark Wave to join in fending off Charizard's attack. Great opportunity. Charizard, finish them now. Yu's eyes lit up, and he quickly seized the opportunity to issue the order. From the very beginning, Yu had intended Moltres to distract the two Psyches, allowing Charizard to seize the opportunity and strike to end the battle. After all, if it hadn't been for this, the two Mews would have had time to observe and formulate a countermeasure. But now, to block the attack from the explosion, the two Mews were forced to devote their full attention and focus to defense. However, Yu didn't notice the slight curl of Jijihua's lips as he issued this order. At the same time, before Yu's excitement could last much longer, his face froze completely. Combined with his expression of wanting to cry but unable to, it was a bit comical. It turned out that just as Charizard received his training order and was about to launch an attack to end the battle, he felt an inexplicably familiar force suddenly strike him, causing his body to suddenly feel heavy. In his moment of shock, he let out a scream, and was the first to realize it. It turned out that Moltres, who was using the explosion to harass and distract attention, had also been suddenly struck by this force. Completely unprepared, even if he had, it would have been futile. So, unsurprisingly, Moltres was the first to hit the ground, and Charizard followed suit. Damn it. That future sight trick again. And, Yu seemed a little furious, but after his anger faded, he regained some of his composure, realizing it belatedly. And why does it seem like Miss Jijihua and her two Mews are stalling for time, waiting for the effects of future sight to take effect? Future sight's onset must have a specific timing, so if that's the case, everything would be easier. Charizard, Moltres, get up and regroup. Use flamethrower together. After instructing the two Pokémon to continue fighting, Yu crouched down, leaned close to Pikachu's ear, and whispered something. Jijihua, though a little puzzled by this, didn't take it too seriously. After all, Moltres' attacks weren't already underway. Meadow continues to use future cognition, and then its wave of evil. I don't know if it was because Jijihua only let the two Meadow learn these two skills, and these two skills were used from beginning to end. Chapter 887 Help. Meadow, continue using future sight, then Dark Wave. Perhaps it was because Jijihua had only taught the two Meadows these two moves, using them throughout the entire process. Yu had already mentally prepared himself, but hearing it again made his mouth twitch. He couldn't help but shudder. This attack was too vile, too disgusting. He'd seen vile and disgusting attacks before, but nothing as disgusting as Jijihua's was truly unmatched. After all, Jijihua was a Pokémon in the hands of a gym trainer, and her power was nothing to behold. The moves the two Pokémon unleashed were truly daunting, especially the future sight move, which was incredibly unexpected and impossible to defend against. Yet, this attack shouldn't have been used in this situation. And even if it was to be used, it should have been by a trainer, not a gym trainer. After all, a gym trainer's job was to teach new trainers the ropes of principles and knowledge. It was a test for them. It was impossible for a gym trainer to set an example by directly using a vile and disgusting fighting method. Yu grumbled inwardly, but he could do nothing about it. After all, no matter how vile or disgusting a fighting method was, it was still a fighting method. For a trainer, as long as they didn't use overly harsh or unethical methods to achieve victory, it could be considered an honest fight. After all, Everyone's personality was different, and their fighting styles were bound to be different. Some fought openly and honorably, while others would use all possible legal means to fight, including those that skirted the rules. However, as Pokemon law gradually improved, these incidents were gradually decreasing. Despite his inward complaints, Yu never forgot his main task. "This is your chance. Pikachu, I'll leave everything to you," Yu said, without even turning his head. He addressed the Pikachu standing at his feet. Pika, it was unclear what Yu had muttered in Pikachu's ear. All he saw was that after Pikachu called out to his trainer, his tail suddenly began swaying back and forth like a needle. A careful observer would have noticed that it was swaying almost once per second. The battle continued, still the same, still a familiar scene. While the Pokemon on both sides engaged in a fierce battle, it was clear that Charizard and Moltres, leveraging their level advantage, crushed the opposing Mewtwo. However, the opposing Mewtwo were no pushovers either. With their seamless coordination, they engaged Moltres and Charizard in a back-and-forth battle. However, the back-and-forth had its end, and after who knows how many times, the effects of the foresight of the future had once again taken effect on Charizard and Moltres. Just as Future Sight's late-stage effects erupted, Pikachu's tail, wagging like a needle, suddenly froze. "How is it going, Pikachu?" How many seconds? It turned out that Yu had been whispering in Pikachu's ear, asking him to calculate how long the late-stage effects of Future Sight would last. Pokemon battles have clear rules. Once both trainers have established their command zones, they cannot leave the field unless there's an emergency. Leaving the field is considered a violation, and the match is deemed forfeited. More importantly, electronic devices are prohibited, even for guides. As for bringing electronic devices into the field and using them, aren't you worried about others exploiting these rules to disrupt the match? Such worries are completely unnecessary. After all, the battlefield isn't like a gym battle, where there aren't usually any spectators. Even some gym battles were open to the public, so the public's eyes were sharp, and not a single move could escape their notice. For various reasons, trainers on both sides of the battle were subject to significant restrictions. Therefore, with no other options, Yu had to let Pikachu act as clockwork for a while. But Pikachu's imitations were incredibly accurate. While there might be slight discrepancies, Pikachu's instincts compensated for them. Pika, in response to his trainer's question, Pikachu excitedly chirped a few times before drawing a number on the ground. "Oh, so that's how it is, Pikachu. Thank you so much." Yu finally understood the situation. He didn't want his Charizard and Moltres to suddenly take effect while they were fighting fiercely. That would be really bad. After all, the late effects of future prediction were incredibly difficult to guard against. Because of this, these two skills have the power to change the course of battle at any moment. "Pikachu, I'll ask you again. After the opponent calls out the skill name, please keep track of the time for me. And when the time is almost up, remember to remind me." Yu leaned close to Pikachu's ear and whispered, as if afraid of being overheard. After receiving the support from his trainer, Pikachu seemed extremely excited. After all, this was a battle between his comrades and his trainer, and it was closely related to him. Moreover, Pikachu had been feeling a little depressed about not being able to participate in the battle. But now, his trainer's instructions made Pikachu feel that he was not just shouting 666 from the outside, but could also help his comrades and trainers in the battle. Ignoring Pikachu's excitement, Yu returned his attention to the battlefield. After forcing himself to cheer up, Yu planned to end the battle with the next wave of attacks and win the gym. Chapter 888 Charming. Pikachu. After receiving Pikachu's affirmative response, Yu felt a slight sense of calm. Forcefully suppressing his inner turmoil, he began to calmly command his Pokemon in battle. "Don't hold back, Moltres, use your maximum power, Ultra Blast. Charizard, don't hold back either, use your full power, Flame Spray." With Pikachu keeping time and reminders, Yu wasn't worried about the risk of future predictions interrupting Moltres or Charizard's abilities. He completely let loose. This was also related to Yu and his Pokemon's usual fighting style. For the sake of safety, in Pokemon battles, unless absolutely certain, Yu would have his Pokemon launch a few tentative attacks. Only when he was absolutely certain, would he truly unleash his Pokemon's full power, just as he was doing now. After all, although Yu was confident of defeating the two Psyches from the outset, that was based on the 9-station foundation, using practical examples to crush them, not simply instantly annihilating the opposing Pokemon. After all, as gym trainers Pokémon, how could the two psyches have any secrets? Therefore, out of a cautious approach, Yu had delayed the battle for so long. It's incredible that after receiving Yu's orders, Moltres and Charizard seemed to have a second spring in their lives, their spirits rising. Flames seemed to rise in their eyes, truly exhausted by the after effects of their previous foresight. If the opponent had been stronger, it would have been fine. It was their superior strength that made them weaker, so they had to accept it. However, they were both significantly stronger than their opponents, yet they were miserably toyed with. Jet flames and large posters blasted towards the two Mews, the scorching flames bearing down on them. The two Mews reacted swiftly, unleashing their dark waves to block the attack before even waiting for Garjiho's command. However, the power of the attack was too immense, and the two Mews couldn't completely withstand it. The aftermath of the explosion still sent them flying. Garjiho's face finally showed a touch of emotion, but that was all. After all, her surprise was simply due to the trainer's prowess. Otherwise, what powerful Pokémon had she not seen at her level and status? After all, besides being a Pokémon and gym trainer, he was also a renowned prophet. Yu, I have to say you're the strongest challenger I've ever seen. But if you think you can defeat me with just this, you're a bit naive. Mita, use Predict, then Ejio, then Dark Wave, begin. Yu, upon hearing Garjiho's command, which mirrored his thoughts, immediately shouted to the Pikachu at his feet. At the same time, the Pikachu standing next to Yu began wagging its tail just as it had before. However, just as Yu was beginning to make his plans, the situation on the battlefield suddenly took a turn for the worse. This was because both Mitas simultaneously used Ejio. Ejio is a surefire way to render Pokémon of the opposite sex completely defenseless. And most crucially, Ejio probably only has a 50% success rate in a one-on-one duel. After all, the opposing trainer doesn't know the gender of the Pokémon being fielded, and Ejio has absolutely no effect on Pokémon of the same sex. But now, the two Mews happen to be one male and one female, which made up for all those uncertainties. Faced with such a situation, Mews quickly adjusted its state and simultaneously used its coquettish skills, leaving no room for resistance or suspense. A ball of love immediately surrounded Moltres and Charizard. In just a moment, the two Pokémon's once sharp eyes immediately gave up their love. After seeing this scene, Yu began to feel worse. In this situation, Moltres and Charizard had no room for resistance at all, becoming fish on the chopping board, at the mercy of others. In a panic, he immediately shouted, Molten and Charizard, you two, cheer up. Wake up. Don't let each other's beauty fool you. You want to be the strongest Pokémon? How can you be so bewildered by a little beauty? This is really too embarrassing. When Yu said this, he seemed particularly excited, as if even his own emotions were affected by it. After hearing Yu's words, the three doubters in the audience all looked a little strange, with different expressions on their faces. But there was one thing that was very similar. They all looked at Yu with a stern face and a hint of anger on their eyebrows. How could Yu say such a thing? It was as if he didn't like girls, but liked people of his kind. How could that damned Yu say that? Just show me how I give him a beating. Give him a beating? That's great. Someone suggested it, but it was immediately met with approval from the other girls. The three girls watching from the audience ignored the strange looks from the other students. They even stopped watching the fierce battle unfolding, instead huddling together and chattering about their next move. The battle didn't stop just because the three girls were discussing. Instead, it intensified as time passed. After confirming that Charizard and Moltres were completely powerless, the two Meowths, as if they'd been bullied for a long time, unleashed their evil pulses without hesitation, unleashing them relentlessly towards Moltres and Charizard, whose eyes were gleaming with love, like crazy fans or fervent bootlickers. Chapter 889 Ending. Facing a barrage of dark waves like a machine gun, Charizard and Moltres were fortunate to be relatively resilient, otherwise they would have been rendered incapable of combat by the attacks they were scalping. This was another advantage of their high level, allowing them to completely wear down those fragile creatures with their health. While these waves of dark waves were a delight from Mew, the constant pain emanating from their bodies immediately awoke Charizard and Moltres from their enchanted state. Upon awakening, Charizard and Moltres remained dazed, unable to comprehend what had happened to them. However, the relentless pain irritated the two Pokémon, letting them know that whatever had happened, it wasn't a good thing. Great, Charizard, Moltres, you've finally woken up. Cheer up, both of you, Yu finally breathed a sigh of relief. After all, having been hit once, he was prepared, he wouldn't be so easily caught again. Charizard, Moltres, keep going. Beat them up. Use Flame Spray and Big Blast. If there were a blue bar like a rage bar, Moltres and Charizard's rage would have already reached peak. A press of the Musou button would unleash it. Instantly, two raging streams of flame connected, attacking the two Pokémon directly. Pikachu's tail swung continuously, as if straightening itself, calculating the time for the later effects of the prediction. Glancing at Pikachu's swaying tail, Yu felt a sense of relief. It's true, the two Meowths in Jijihua's hands were feeling a bit exhausted at this point. They could only continue to block with their familiar signature skill, Dark Wave. While Dark Wave had seemed incredibly powerful moments earlier, dealing some damage to Moltres and Charizard, it was now like a small boat on a raging sea, barely making a single wave before the two flames. Great job, that's how you do it. Don't stop, keep attacking. Use Pikachu. While both skills successfully hit Meowth, the Meowth, having suffered minimal damage throughout, didn't immediately lose their combat capability after the two blasts of fire. But at this point, their condition wasn't much better, practically half damaged. Just as Yu was about to press on and order Charizard and Moltres to continue their attack, Pikachu at his feet let out a timely cry. The command Yu had been about to issue was stuck in his throat, mute. His gaze, once fixed on the front, narrowed slightly, and the smile that curved his lips took on a cold arc. He'd finally waited for this moment. He'd thought it wouldn't come again after he'd finished this battle. But now that it had arrived, it was a perfect opportunity for Charizard and Moltres to pick themselves up right where they'd fallen. The after effects of Predict the Future didn't appear out of thin air. The after effects of the two skills were like homing missiles, unstoppable unless they were focused on their target. And they didn't just appear instantly next to the targeted Pokémon, they were always at a distance. Previously, Moltres and Charizard had been caught in the trap because they were so engrossed in the battle that they hadn't noticed. But now, thanks to the careful timing Yu had instructed Pikachu to use, he was now completely confident. After the initial pause, Yu quickly issued another order. Where you fell, you must rise again. Moltres, Charizard, now's your time to prove yourself. Spread your wings and fly freely, Charizard, use smoke. The moment the command was given, Charizard and Moltres flapped their wings without hesitation, increasing the distance between them. At the same time, Charizard opened its maw, spewing out plumes of black smoke. The dark smoke, a depressing spread, quickly filled the sky, obscuring everything between the crowd and the Pokémon. Where will it appear from? As if completely absorbed in the rhythm of the situation, the usually calm and composed Jejiho suddenly felt a hint of anxiety and nervousness. She unconsciously leaned forward slightly, trying to better see the situation and locate the two Pokémon. But how could Yu and Charizard give their opponents even a moment to react? Especially since this was such a golden opportunity. A faint glow shone through the billowing smoke, a faint glint of light emanating from Charizard and Moltres as they moved. Yu was able to see clearly because he channeled his inner energy into his eyes. Indeed, just as some gym trainers had selfishly used telekinesis to aid their Pokémon, he could similarly draw upon his inner energy to aid himself, allowing him to see the situation more clearly, better analyze it, and adjust his command. Don't panic, Meowth. Use your supernatural power on the surrounding smoke to disperse it. True to her reputation as a formidable gym trainer, Jejiho quickly provided a countermeasure. As expected, Meowth quickly began to clear the dense fog. The dense fog quickly thinned, allowing even the faintest glimpse of four constantly moving figures within. Meowth, the Meowth, having finally gained a clearer view of the scene before them, rejoiced at the clearing of the fog and the restoration of their vision. At this moment, they stared at the scene before them with a certain amount of fear. More precisely, at the two Pokémon that appeared before them. After gazing into their powerful eyes, they felt a sense of panic. It was too late for Meowth to react. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 890 Slap. After meeting Charizard and Moltres' powerful eyes, they felt a wave of panic. It was too late for Mewtwo to react. But the next scene only served to stun them even further. The two Pokémon that had suddenly appeared before them didn't seize the opportunity to attack them. Instead, after exchanging glances, they suddenly rose or fell rapidly. Mewtwo was delighted that Charizard and Moltres hadn't attacked them. But their joy didn't last long, as their hearts sank. Then, as Charizard and Moltres twisted their bodies, their view behind them was completely exposed. They saw two beams of energy barreling towards them at breakneck speed. These beams were all too familiar to Mewtwo. Wasn't this the lingering effect of their ability, predict the future? Bang! Bang! The sound of explosions echoed. Without a trace of suspense, the two Mewtwo were directly struck by the after effects of their own future predictions. And because the attack came so suddenly, the two Mewtwo were completely unable to resist. They were slammed down from mid-air, incapacitated. Mewtwo is incapacitated, Charizard and Moltres have won the battle, and therefore, Challenger Yu has won this battle. Flame Momai apparently having won the battle, both Pokémon seemed particularly happy. They flew back to Yu, like two children seeking credit from an adult, their faces filled with excitement. Yu, of course, did not hesitate to offer his encouragement, reaching out and stroking the heads of both Pokémon. Okay, thank you two for your hard work this time. I'll give you a snack when we get home tonight, and I'll have Xiaoxia make you some delicious Pokémon food as a reward. Yu spoke these words with remarkable naturalness, as if he and Xiaoxia were already family, inseparable. The three women who had just left the audience to congratulate Yu on his victory all looked a little strange after hearing his words. Serena and Xiao's cheeks puffed slightly, and Xiaoxia, after her initial gaze, a faint blush crept across her cheeks. When Psyche was knocked incapacitated, Jijiho no longer floated in mid-air but landed on the ground, walking towards Yu. Yu, you are truly a formidable Pokémon trainer. I'm truly looking forward to seeing if you can successfully reach the pinnacle. Just as the prophecy said, after retrieving the two Psyche Mew, Jijiho approached Yu, her expression calm again. Though seemingly questioning, it was more like stating a fact. Yu hadn't expected Jijiho to suddenly say something like that. After all, should she give the gym badge first and then offer some words of encouragement? However, Yu quickly caught on, a confident expression on his face. Yes, I will reach the pinnacle. And by then, it won't just be me at the top, but my Pokémon as well. We will definitely reach the pinnacle of strength. We will become the most powerful Pokémon Masters in Pokémon. Yu's words were resounding, his eyes gleaming with determination, a look that moved everyone. Haha, I'm looking forward to that day. At that moment, Jijiho seemed to be strangely influenced by Yu's words, and it was Lucky's first smile since Yu arrived. At this moment, the female student acting as referee also arrived, dragging a tray with her. Okay, this is the Bake Gym's gym badge. I'll give it to you now. By the way, Yu, I heard you came from that mysterious ancient country in the east. So, are you interested in visiting my Bake Gym? Believe me, the things here will surely amaze you. Of course, your friends can come too. After seeing Yu accept the gym badge, Jijiho extended another invitation. Is that okay? Although Yu was somewhat uninterested, he glanced at the excited expressions of the three women nearby and couldn't refuse. Sure, everyone, come with me. Region dividing line. Just as Yu had won the Bake Gym's gym battle and the Bake Gym badge, and was invited by the Bake Gym's gym trainer to visit the gym, at the same time, a scene unfolded in the Kanto region, a considerable distance from the Kalos region. In Viridian City, at the Pokémon Center. At this moment, after being initially stopped by Miss Junsa, Xiaozhi was rushed to the Pokémon Center by Miss Junsa's frantic car. Nearly half an hour had passed since Pikachu was rushed to the emergency room. Xiaozhi sat on a chair in the corridor outside the operating room, like an ant on a hot pan, standing up and sitting down again. This cycle repeated countless times. It ended only when a girl with short orange hair, fiercely carrying the almost unrecognizable bicycle, angrily slapped Xiaozhi in the face. The boy had calmed down, acting like a docile sheep around the girl, no longer displaying his previous anxiety. However, his frequent glances at the closed operating room and the red light above revealed his anxiety and nervousness. It was obvious that the girl who dared to slap the future Xiaozhi was, of course, the future Super Saiyan, known as the Mermaid Beauty Xiaozhi. Honestly, after initially slapping Satoshi in anger due to all the previous encounters, Misty's anger eventually subsided, especially after learning what had happened. They were friends before, so she felt a little guilty, but at least Misty couldn't see it. Chapter 891 Xiaozhi's Reflection. Don't worry too much, Ash. Trust Miss Joy. They'll definitely help Pikachu recover. After all, Miss Joy and her team are recognized as the world's most skilled Pokémon nurses. It's almost as if they only eat Pokémon that have died of old age. They can't save anything. After a long pause before she could finish her words, Misty glanced at the now anxious Ash and offered some words of advice. Ash's current appearance was truly unflattering. He looked like a middle-aged man, embodying all the vicissitudes of life, his eyes bloodshot. His disheveled appearance only made the image seem even more convincing. I know. But I'm just wondering, can I really be a good Pokémon trainer? Can I really become a Pokémon Master? Ash lowered his head, his gaze vacant as he stared at the white hallway floor, reflecting his current image. He seemed to be questioning Misty, but also himself. Hey, why do you say that? Misty was also stunned by Xiaozhi's sudden question, and she asked unconsciously. I don't think there's a Pokémon trainer as bad and weak as me in the world. It's only the first day of our trip, and Pikachu is already injured like this. What will the future hold? And I feel so weak. I can't even protect Pikachu in a dangerous moment. I feel like a loser. Misty couldn't tell if it was an illusion, but she only felt a slight choking in her voice as she heard Xiaozhi's words. But what she saw next confirmed her true feelings. She saw a small water stain on the floor beneath Xiaozhi. Although Xiaozhi quickly interrupted it, Misty's astonishing eyesight still saw it. She cast a complicated glance at the boy who usually seemed carefree, and even capable of anything, with a carefree attitude. Misty felt strangely moved, and her own experiences flashed back to her. Yes. Wasn't Xiaozhi's question the same one she often asked herself? She had 3 older sisters, but none of them were easygoing. They weren't serious about their jobs, abandoning their jobs as gym trainers to perform water ballet. While that was her sister's dream, and her own, it was the same. But if they all devoted themselves entirely to water ballet, what would become of their own gym? Would they always carry the reputation of being the weakest gym in Kanto? And if their gym was officially delisted by the league in a few years, she would truly feel sorry for her parents. After all, this gym was a legacy passed down from their parents. To prevent her gym from being delisted, Misty had to start traveling, training diligently, and capturing powerful Pokémon. She hoped to build up her strength to support the entire Cerulean gym, but after so long, she felt like she had accomplished nothing. I guess when I get home, I'll be laughed at by my 3 sisters again. How nice it would be if Yu was by my side at this time. He would help me whenever I have any difficulties or problems that I can't solve. Unlike now, my own troubles have not been solved yet, and I haven't gotten any vent. Xiaozhi next to me is like a wronged child, who still needs comfort. Why is my life so hard? Xiaozhi, none of this is your fault. You are just a novice trainer who has just started out. And you have to believe in yourself. Pikachu won't blame you. Otherwise, he wouldn't be like that, trying his best to protect you as a trainer. This shows that he values you more. Xiaoxia comforted him at the right time. It seemed that Xiaoxia's words had worked. Xiaozhi's body, which was originally trembling with excitement, now calmed down slightly. Although I didn't personally witness what you went through, judging by your injuries, Ash, you genuinely wanted to protect Pikachu, didn't you? Misty spoke with remarkable sincerity, her beautiful eyes fixed on Ash. Ash, seemingly lost in memories, seemed to be reflecting on his own journey, but gradually, his furrowed brow began to relax. Perhaps, as Misty had said, he was just a novice trainer, unable to take on so many concerns. Ash, too, began to reflect on himself, a rare moment of self-reflection, a rare occurrence for someone like Ash. Seeing this, Misty smiled with relief. However, she was concerned about her now battered bicycle, once a crucial means of transportation for her future travels. Misty could only grimace, also appearing somewhat frustrated. I hadn't expected to catch anything on my fishing trip today, and I even lost my beloved bicycle. It was truly a case of losing both the wife and the army. Not only did he gain nothing, but he was clearly the victim, and now he had to comfort another victim. It took no time before Xiaozhi finally turned away from his fans. Misty, who had been sitting next to him, had disappeared. But for the carefree Xiaozhi, it was merely a slight surprise, and he immediately dismissed it. After all, it was already late, and for a girl as conscious of beauty as Misty, Early bedtime and early rise were essential to maintain her good looks. How did someone as unpretentious as Xiaozhi know this? Of course, his mother, Hanako, taught him. Glancing at the still closed operating room, Xiaozhi felt a little worried, but the initial anxiety was gone. He reflected that he had been out for quite some time today and hadn't even reported his safety to his family. Xiaozhi then stood up and planned to go and report that he was safe. Chapter 892, Conversation with Professor Oak. After realizing he'd been out for quite some time today and still hadn't called home to let them know he was safe, Ash stood up and decided to go check in. However, since his family didn't have a communicator, he had no choice but to call Professor Oak, asking him to notify his mother. Even after waiting at the door for so long, the clock had already ticked to 10 o'clock. But Professor Oak, a workaholic, didn't care about taking a break. As soon as Ash connected his communicator, the screen on the other end showed a bowl of steaming instant noodles. A question mark immediately crossed Ash's mind, and he froze, completely confused. Shouldn't he be calling Professor Oak's house? Why was there a bowl of instant noodles? Professor Oak, Ash called into the intercom, and the person on the other end finally responded. My noodles are getting burned. Professor Oak's panicked cry came from the other end of the communicator. After a flurry of activity, the screen in front of Ash finally stopped displaying instant noodles and instead showed Professor Oak's face. This time, though, Professor Oak was enjoying the now burned noodles with relish, chatting with Ash. Oh. Where are you now, Ash? After slurping his noodles, Professor Oak asked slowly. Professor Oak, I've already arrived at the Pokémon Center in Viridian City. Though Ash felt speechless, he continued. Oh, already in Viridian City? You're pretty fast then. After slurping his noodles again, Professor Oak glanced at Ash, who looked rather disheveled. Ash, so worried about Pikachu's safety, hadn't even had time to change into clean clothes. His clothes were now tattered, and his body bore several deep scratches. Beneath these deep scratches were traces of blood. And what's wrong with you, Satoshi? Are you hurt? Professor Oak stopped enjoying his bowl of instant noodles and quickly set it aside, asking Satoshi with concern. After all, Satoshi was the boy he most admired. Furthermore, they were neighbors and had known each other for a long time. Satoshi, seeing Professor Oak's concerned, inquiring gaze, hesitated for a moment before unleashing his entire experience. He also unburdened Professor Oak of his recent self-doubt, his subsequent reflections, and Misty's words of comfort. After all, while Misty's words of comfort had made Satoshi feel a little better, there were still some things he couldn't share. Misty was still a girl, and about his own age, so the comfort she could offer him was limited. Professor Oak, however, was different. Beyond his status as a Pokémon researcher, he had experienced a great deal, despite his age. He was always the kind and gentle elder, deeply attentive to new trainers like himself. Ash, in particular, had known Professor Oak since childhood, often visiting his lab to play with his Pokémon. Their relationship was closer than family. I see. Ash, don't take it too personally. Perhaps, just as Misty said, Pikachu won't blame you. Professor Oak, true to his gracious nature, listened to Ash's story and began to counsel him. Ash listened intently, not interrupting. It was as if he was absorbed in Professor Oak's counseling, yet also as if he couldn't bear to interrupt. By the way, Ash, how many Pokémon did you catch today? You know, that guy, Momo, has already caught over 10. Professor Oak wasn't Professor Oak after all. His love and research for Pokémon reached the point of obsession and madness. Almost 9 out of 10 of his sentences revolved around Pokémon. Ash was stunned by Professor Oak's question, scratching his head in embarrassment. He'd originally intended to tell Professor Oak the truth, but then he mentioned that Momo had already caught over 10. Wouldn't it be a shame to compare his own situation to Momo's? After all, not only had he not caught a single Pokémon all day, he'd been chased by a swarm of toucans, and now even his own Pikachu is still being rescued. But meeting Professor Oak's slightly expectant gaze, Ash finally gave in and told his story. Unsurprisingly, Professor Oak's face wore a hint of disappointment after hearing this. After all, Professor Oak was desperate for Ash to feel better. He had sent his Pokémon to him for further study. Only by continuously studying various Pokémon and refining their data could he truly perfect and complete his life's work, the Pokédex. Otherwise, the current Pokédex would still be severely flawed. For example, he wouldn't know about some Pokémon he had never seen before. If he didn't know about these Pokémon, then he, the creator of the Pokédex, wouldn't have entered them, and the Pokémon trainers holding the Pokédex would have been even less likely to know about them. A flicker of disappointment crossed his face, but Professor Oak, still concerned about Ash's current situation, began to comfort him, constantly encouraging him to cheer up and not be so depressed. After all, such a depressed state was unacceptable. By the way, Professor Oak, I encountered a Pokémon today that's not even mentioned in the Pokédex. What exactly is that Pokémon? It looks so noble, so sacred, and so powerful. Xiaozhi then turned to ask about Ho-Oh. He was extremely curious about this Pokémon he had never seen before and whose name wasn't mentioned in the Pokédex. Chapter 893 Painting. By the way, Professor Oak, I encountered a Pokémon today, one that's not even mentioned in the Pokédex. What is that Pokémon? It looks so noble, so sacred, so powerful. Xiaozhi then turned to ask about Ho-Oh. He was incredibly curious about this Pokémon, one he had never seen before and whose Pokédex had no mention in the Pokédex. After all, among Yu Yu's acquaintances, besides Professor Oak, the renowned Pokémon researcher, Xiaozhi was the only one with the greatest passion and dedication for Pokémon. It could even be said that in some ways, even Professor Oak, a professional in his field, couldn't match Xiaozhi. Because of this, Xiaozhi became even more obsessed with Pokémon he didn't know about, wanting to get to know them and become their friends. Oh, what kind of Pokémon could that be? Boy, do you remember what it looked like? Professor Oak's interest was piqued. After all, the Pokédex he'd given Xiaozhi wasn't as comprehensive as the National Pokédex. However, numerous Pokémon throughout the Kanto region, and even beyond, contain Lulu. Yet, even with this particular Pokémon, Ash couldn't find any good information on it. This intrigued Professor Oak, who, after all, was a Pokémon researcher's absolute lover. He set the instant noodles he had just picked up aside again. Well, I'll give it a try. Ash scratched his head, uncertain. But Professor Oak couldn't care less. His twilight eyes fixed on Ash across the screen, as if he feared he might miss some crucial clue due to carelessness. Ash felt a bit overwhelmed, but he still grabbed a piece of white paper and began scribbling. Professor Oak observed Ash's drawing from the other side of the screen. Though deeply anxious, as a skilled Pokémon researcher and observer, he couldn't afford to disturb the other person at this moment, lest all his memories be wasted. Waiting was always boring, and Professor Oak across from him seemed to think it was no longer a big deal. He tried to pick up the instant noodles he'd put down and take a few bites, but found they were completely cold. There was nothing he could do. On the other side of the screen, Professor Oak had somehow brought a massive pot. It was the hot pot that dominated his lab. But it was true, watching Professor Oak devouring his food with such relish, Ash, who had just finished his masterpiece to his satisfaction, looked up and saw this scene, his mouth nearly watering. His stomach rumbled uncontrollably, as if protesting to his master why he hadn't eaten at this hour. It was true, though, that Ash, already troubled by his previous emotions, was already fretting over his own problems. He'd even forgotten about eating. After Misty and Professor Oak's counseling, Ash's mood had improved considerably. However, this also caused his stomach to complain, even though he'd completely relaxed. However, Professor Oak seemed oblivious to the disgruntled grumble of Ash's stomach on the other side of the video. His gaze was fixed on Ash's newly completed masterpiece. Ash, hurry up, let me see what that Pokémon looks like. Maybe I'll finally know. Professor Oak was so impatient that he subconsciously blocked out the grumbling of his stomach. His gaze was fixed on Ash's creation, as if only this way could he instantly see it. Ash didn't hesitate, nor did he think there was anything wrong with his Ho-Oh image. But when Ash presented his work to Professor Oak, the corner of his mouth twitched violently. If it weren't for his own image, he would have wanted to question Ash. But at this moment, Professor Oak couldn't help but ask, Ahem, Satoshi. What exactly did you draw? Why does it look like a picture of a turkey eating rice? It's too abstract. Satoshi was a bit confused by Professor Oak's explanation, and took the picture back to study it again. Professor Oak, what are you talking about? I was clearly drawing a bird. How did it become a chicken? I'm drawing a bird flying in the sky, with all those rainbow colors. Look, I'm obediently up there. How can you not see it? The fog's expression was not as brilliant as it could be. He stared at Satoshi's picture with disbelief. Yes, there are indeed rainbow colors, But why do your rainbow colors look like just 7 lines? Alright, Xiaozhi, just describe the Pokemon you saw to me and I'll draw it. You can see if it's the one. Professor Oak, seemingly unable to bear it any longer, quickly offered a compromise. At the same time, he felt a little annoyed. He should have added a photo function to the Pokemon images, recording any Pokemon scanned in the Pokédex. Then, when the Pokédex was back, couldn't he study it just the same? Well, okay, Xiaozhi finally realized it belatedly and put his drawing away with a bit of frustration. However, out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of the massive murals on the communicator at the Pokemon Center. Wasn't one of them the image of the unknown Pokemon he had seen today? Because the large mural was facing the communicator, Xiaozhi excitedly pointed at it and shouted to Professor Oak. Professor Oak, Professor Oak. Look, that's the Pokemon I'm talking about. Chapter 894 Excitement. Professor Oak, look, that's the Pokemon I'm talking about, Ash said excitedly, pointing to the mural on the other side of the communicator. Oh. This is, as if afraid of not being able to see clearly, Professor Oak's entire face, like the mural in the video on the other side, was once again glued to the screen. Ash could even faintly make out some lingering instant noodle residue on Professor Oak's face. Professor Oak, however, was no longer bothered by anything else. His eyes were fixed on the mural Ash was pointing to. Although there were 3 other murals similar to this one nearby, after Ash's words, Professor Oak's focus was now solely on that one mural. After all, compared to those legendary Pokemon, it was better to be more practical, the Pokemon he might have researched and obtained. And it was worth mentioning that the mural Ash was pointing to, despite its rustic appearance, bore an 80% resemblance to Ho-Oh. Isn't this the legendary mythical beast, Ho-Oh, that possesses the magical power to resurrect the dead, creates rainbows wherever it flies, and is said to grant eternal happiness to anyone who sees it? Professor Oak, true to his word, immediately recognized the Ho-Oh's origins. This, however, only heightened his excitement. Even his gaze towards Satoshi was tinged with a hint of envy. Satoshi, I never imagined your luck would be so good. You're almost as lucky as you. It's only the first day of your journey, and you've already encountered the legendary Ho-Oh, a creature said to appear only once in 1,000 years. Why didn't I have such good luck? Well, for a scholar like Professor Oak, dedicated to the study of Pokemon, encountering such a rare Pokemon is a sacred and once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The mere sight of a legendary Pokemon would surely fill them with excitement for ages. For those of us who are so obsessed with Pokemon research, forgetting food and sleep is probably just a small matter. They'd probably spend days and nights studying all that Pokemon information without even getting a single sleep. What? That Pokemon Pikachu and I saw was actually a legendary beast. Satoshi's expression lit up with excitement. A complete Pokemon fan, Satoshi, though he spent some time away from home, knew the fame of legendary beasts. Yes, Ho-Oh is said to live in the Chengdu area, in a place called the Bell Tower. It's even rumored that the other 2 legendary beasts, Rikao and Entei, along with Suicune in Yuyu's possession, were resurrected by Ho-Oh. Professor Oak's eyes lit up with enthusiasm as he spoke. It couldn't be helped. Compared to the 3 sacred beasts and the 3 legendary birds, legendary beasts with higher stats like Ho-Oh, Lugia, and Celebi possess even more remarkable abilities. Oh, right, Xiaozhi, did you take a picture of Ho-Oh? Maybe I can glean some valuable insights from it. Professor Oak noticed a hopeful look in Xiaozhi's eyes. He looked eager, like a child desperately wanting a lollipop. Even to Xiaozhi, it was just a tiny, insignificant photo. But for those dedicated Pokemon researchers, even a single feather, let alone a photo, was invaluable. For a Pokemon researcher of their caliber, such information was enough to deduce numerous things, which they could then compare to real-world results. Of course, if given the means, they'd rather study the entire Pokemon, not just a single part. Some crazy Pokemon researchers, for even the slightest clue about a particular Pokemon, would go to great lengths to find it, no matter the cost. Then, he'd just about want to cling to that Pokemon all day, practically eating and sleeping at the same time, even going to the bathroom at the same time. But ultimately, Professor Oak was disappointed. Satoshi wasn't the most meticulous person. Even if he saw a Pokemon with no information in the Pokédex, he wouldn't pull out his camera to take a picture. He'd rather see it more, be moved more. So, Even though he felt a little uneasy at Professor Oak's actions, he honestly shook his head, admitting he was useless. Suddenly, it was as if all the strength in Professor Oak's body had been drained. He drooped, looking dejected and pathetic. No pictures? That's a shame. Professor Oak, at that moment, was no longer as energetic as he had been a moment ago. He looked like a little old man who had suffered a grievance. If you looked closely, you could even see tears glistening in his eyes. I'm old, I really can't handle this constant stream of blows. If I hadn't had a healthy heart, I'd probably have gone to see my master after this roller coaster of emotions. Ash, after witnessing the scene, felt a pang of pain. After all, Professor Oak's kindness to him was obvious to all. At the same moment, he felt a surge of self-blame. Why hadn't he taken that photo back then? But it was just a thought. Given Ash's personality and the circumstances at the time, he couldn't think much. After all, Pikachu was already seriously injured at that moment. Would a normal person immediately rush to get the injured Pokémon to help? Would Ash, caught in his own self-blame, and Professor Oak, who looked incredibly disappointed on the other side of the video, didn't notice was that under the lights of the Pokémon Center, Yu's shadow was stretched so long that it reflected on the white, reflective ground, making it seem like he was being ignored. However, under the reflection of the flawless white tiles, two red lights similar to eyes suddenly flashed in the shadow. Chapter 895, Professor Oak's Transformation. Reflected against the flawless white tiles, two red eyes suddenly flickered within the shadow. The tiny red lights flickered, like blinking eyes. At that moment, these eye-like lights curiously surveyed everything around them, particularly Professor Oak, who was currently chatting with Satoshi in the video. By the way, Professor Oak, although I didn't take a picture of that Toho, I do have something here, Satoshi exclaimed, the sudden exclamation startling the twinkling red eyes within Satoshi's shadow. Immediately, the red eyes vanished once more into the shadow, as if they had never appeared. Even if one looked closely, one wouldn't have even noticed that there had once been a pair of eyes gazing at the surroundings within the shadow. Oh. What is that? Hurry up and take it out, let me pick one out. Ash's words immediately piqued Professor Oak's interest. The previously listless Professor Oak suddenly seemed to have rekindled his energy, appearing energetic and unbelievably young. Professor Oak, wait a minute, I'll look for it. With that, Ash hurried off, searching for his backpack. After all, while research material might be invaluable to Professor Oak and his team, it was a mere trifle for a trainer like Ash. When he first received the golden feather, he was only briefly amazed. Then he tossed it into his space backpack, where it was now hidden somewhere. If it fell into the hands of someone like Ash, he'd probably have to dig through it for a while before finding it. But to Professor Oak, these were trivial matters. After all, the thought of studying the unidentified object Satoshi had mentioned filled him with a strange excitement. Satoshi didn't keep Professor Oak waiting for long, as he soon returned excitedly. In his hand, he clutched a beautiful golden feather, aglow with a rainbow of colors. Suddenly, in what seemed like a fleeting moment, or the blink of an eye, Professor Oak's eyes fixed on the golden feather. What is this, Professor Oak? I'm talking about this golden feather. It was left behind by the Ho-Oh Pokemon when it flew overhead. Satoshi sounded a bit puzzled at this, but he was more focused on examining the golden feather. Indeed, upon closer inspection, the golden feather looked quite extraordinary, covered in a variety of intricate patterns. A subtle energy flowed through it. Oh wow! Could this actually be a feather from Ho-Oh? That's incredibly valuable for research. Professor Oak's gaze at the feather now grew even more intense. Puffs of white smoke streamed from his nose, like a Kintaro in heat. Satoshi, can I study this feather of yours? Though his heart was already simmering with fervor, Professor Oak still respected Satoshi's opinion. After all, he could only take it if Satoshi agreed. Professor Oak understood the principle of proper conduct. He wouldn't use his status to bully Satoshi. If Hanako knew about this, not only would her protective nature be a problem, but her own conscience would be shattered. Of course. Professor Oak, take it if you need it. It's of no use to me, Satoshi agreed without a second thought, appearing incredibly generous. After all, for Ash, something like Ho-Oh's possessions were of little use to him. Instead, a few Pokeballs or even a Pokemon egg would be far more practical. However, what Ash didn't know was that when he offered to lend the feather to Professor Oak for research, the shadow on the floor, its red eyes flickering constantly. A dark, sinister aura emanated from the shadow. The malice in its eyes, directed at Professor Oak across the video, grew increasingly apparent. It was like a ferocious beast poised to attack at any moment. It was as if the interests of the owner of these eyes were being encroached upon by Professor Oak. Even through the video, Professor Oak felt an inexplicable chill running down his spine. He felt a subconscious sense of falling into an abyss, as if his thoughts were no longer under his control. Professor Oak, a veteran of countless battles and trials, immediately realized something was amiss. Without hesitation, he shouted to Satoshi, "Stop, Satoshi. I feel something strange about that feather. It's definitely not just a simple feather from Ho-Oh. It must hold some kind of message. Since Ho-Oh has given it to you, you must keep it safe. Remember, this is definitely connected to something, so you must protect this feather." Satoshi was startled by Professor Oak's sudden seriousness. He looked at the feather in his hand, which seemed ordinary to him. Although he didn't believe what Professor Oak said was so strange, he still immediately put it away. However, before putting the feather away, Satoshi still hesitated. "But, Professor Oak, what about your research? If I keep this feather, won't it be able to be sent to Professor Oak's laboratory?" Professor Oak's answer to Satoshi's question was very firm. "That's okay. Protecting this feather is the most important thing. If you really insist on me researching it, I'll have to decline, but you'll have to come back sometime. For some reason, I have a feeling there's a special connection between you and this feather." Chapter 896 No More. "Professor Oak, you're saying there's some unbreakable connection between this feather and me?" Ash was actually taken aback by Professor Oak's serious tone. After all, how could someone not be alarmed to hear someone else say their fate was connected to something else? "Yes, I'm not sure what that connection is, but it's definitely true." Professor Oak had his own way of thinking, but just as he was about to take the feather from Ash for research, an invisible force kept telling him not to do so. The consequences would be dire. "If you really feel bad, take a picture of the feather and send it to me. There's a big difference between studying a photo and studying the real thing, but for me right now, this should be enough." Professor Oak, seeing Ash's struggles, lowered his expectations again and again. Alright, Professor Oak had already said that. What else could Ash do? He had no choice but to agree. After all, if Professor Oak lowered his demands, anyone who saw him like this might think Ash was disrespectful and bullying an old man. So, under Professor Oak's instruction, Ash took a photo of the golden feather and sent it to him. The shadow on the floor, its red eyes flashing, seemed to let go of its nervousness upon seeing this, fading once again into the shadows, sinking into darkness. Just then, Misty had somehow heard that Ash was on a video call and rushed over. She brought good news with her. Perhaps it was from her haste, but Misty seemed a little breathless. Ash, you, hurry, go see Pikachu. Pikachu, as she ran to Ash, Misty couldn't help but bend over and breathlessly relay the news, though her words were a bit halting. But when Ash saw her disjointed expression, he saw something else. Especially after hearing the news contained in her fragmented words, Ash felt as if he had been struck by lightning, and his whole body was in a state of shock. If he hadn't been much more resilient than others, he would have probably fainted by now. After the initial shock, he ran towards the operating room of the Pokémon Center in a panic. Pikachu, what's wrong with you? You must not get hurt." Watching Ash's rapidly receding figure, it was Misty, who was still panting, who became a little dazed. "What's going on? This is Satoshi. What happened?" "I wanted to tell him that Pikachu has been rescued by Miss Joy and Chandler, and is out of danger, and that he should go check on her, but there's no need to rush." "And why does she sound so miserable? So sad and heartbroken?" Misty, unsure of what to do, decided to give it a try. After calming herself down, she rushed to the operating room at the Pokémon Center. However, on the other side of the video feed, Professor Oak, who had witnessed the entire scene, didn't hear Misty's quiet mutterings. He genuinely thought something serious had happened to Pikachu, and he immediately asked with concern. Because of you, Misty knew not only Satoshi, but also Professor Oak, Shigeki, and even Hanako. Therefore, Professor Oak had no trouble asking questions. "Miss, you just mentioned Pikachu. What's wrong with it? What happened? Is it serious? Do you need me to help?" This also shows Professor Oak's care for Ash and his concern for Pokémon. Whenever Professor Oak encounters a situation that can help Pokémon, he rarely stands idly by. Misty, who was about to leave, was startled when someone called her name, but she soon realized it was Professor Oak on a video call. Because she knew Professor Oak well, Misty didn't have the usual excitement and admiration upon first meeting him. But after all, since they hadn't seen each other for a long time, Misty was still filled with joy upon suddenly seeing Professor Oak. The next step she had taken, he retracted, and she approached Ash's previous position. Professor Oak, long time no see. Misty looked at Professor Oak in the video with a hint of joy. It's been a while, Misty. You look even prettier. You haven't answered your question yet, Professor Oak replied with a kind smile. Although she also had something to say to Misty, whom she hadn't seen in a while, she was more concerned about Pikachu's condition than Kuang. Oh, Pikachu. He's fine. Miss Joy just told me he's out of danger. He'll be back to full health after a few days of rest. Hearing this, even Professor Oak couldn't help but twitch his lips. Is that so? But why did Satoshi sound like something had happened? Like something really serious, like Pikachu was about to. At this point, Professor Oak couldn't continue. After all, such fluctuating moods weren't good for someone of his age. Misty, after hearing Professor Oak's words, recalled Satoshi's behavior, and a blush crept across her fair face. As for the reason, only she knew. But since it was a rare opportunity to meet Professor Oak, Misty wasn't going to let it go. She immediately resumed the conversation. After receiving the news from Misty, Xiaozhi ran as fast as he could, his heart pounding with sadness, and soon arrived at the operating room. For some reason, the door to the operating room was still open, leaving it crack. Even a gust of wind could easily blow it open, but for Xiaozhi, what seemed like an easy task seemed like a daunting task. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 897 Oolong. Standing at the door to the Pokémon Center's operating room, Xiaozhi kept repeating the same action. Deep breath, reach out, then retract. Deep breath, reach out, then retract. He repeated this movement countless times. But the door before him refused to open. He hesitated, a strange dread swirling within him, making him unwilling to face this reality. Amidst these emotions, the devastated expression on his face made it even harder for him to accept. Was he going to become the first Pokémon trainer in history to die before achieving his goal? On the first day of his journey, his Pokémon was leaving him. And not because he had abandoned them, but because he had encountered a hellish challenge right from the start. He would be laughed at by his peers. And his goal was to become the world's #1 Pokémon Master. If that happened, it would surely become a nightmare he would never forget. A complex web of thoughts swirled in Ash's mind. Even for someone as insensitive and reserved as Ash, it was truly remarkable that he was able to process so much in this situation. It was clear he was feeling the pain and fear of facing the harsh reality. But ultimately, perhaps it was Ash's continuous movements that created a breeze that blew the operating room door open, completely exposing Ash to the public. Inside the operating room, Miss Joy and her assistant, Jigglypuff, remained, tinkering with something beside Pikachu's bed. But in Ash's view, this scene took on a different meaning. He simply assumed Pikachu was truly dying, and Miss Joy and Jigglypuff were performing a last-ditch effort. A flash of lightning struck Ash's mind, and even though he hated it, he had no choice but to accept the reality. With a stumbling step, he rushed directly to Pikachu's hospital bed. As he took each step, tears welled up in his eyes, ready to burst forth at any moment. Pikachu, Pikachu, what's wrong with you? A shrill wail emanated from Satoshi's mouth, accompanied by a fleeting figure, who had already laid down on Pikachu's bed. Miss Joy and Chandler were both stunned, watching the scene before them, unable to understand what had happened to Satoshi. He had been fine before. Ash, Miss Joy was about to say something, but before she could even begin, she was interrupted. Miss Joy, you don't have to tell me. I know everything. Just tell me, how long does Pikachu have left? Don't worry, I'm mentally prepared for everything. Ash lifted his head from the hospital bed. Tears had already blurred his cheeks, and since he hadn't had time to clean them up before, the tears now made his face look a bit blurry. PFFT, he suppressed a smile. Miss Joy, with her excellent professional ethics, how could she laugh in such a serious situation? Ash, I think you misunderstood. That's not what I wanted to tell you. Fighting back a laugh, Miss Joy playfully stuck out her tongue at Ash. What do you mean? Ash's face was still wet with tears, and his expression was particularly funny. I just wanted to tell you that Pikachu is out of danger now, but he still needs to rest for a while. After all, the initial boost was fine, but later on, his energy levels were significantly depleted, and it's difficult to replenish them all at once. Plus, he's a bit weak right now, so he needs to rest slowly. Miss Joy stopped teasing Ash and quickly explained Pikachu's condition in detail. Is this true? Pikachu, he's fine. Ash was still a little incredulous. If you don't believe me, go check out Pikachu's condition. The ECG monitor next to him can't be fake, right? Miss Joy shook her head, looking at Ash with a slightly more respectful eye. After all, from all his previous actions, it was clear that Ash truly cared about his Pokémon. Sure enough, after Miss Joy's words, Ash took a closer look at Pikachu's condition on the bed. All that was left was Pikachu, his wounds already coated with an unknown medication, and the more serious injuries were bandaged. His small chest rose and fell, and his breathing was perfectly even, as if he were having a beautiful dream. He would occasionally smack his lips, seemingly unharmed, and sleeping soundly. Ash's anxiety finally settled, but he couldn't help but wonder. But that's not what Misty said just now, Miss Joy. Didn't you tell her to tell me Pikachu was dying? Just then, the operating room door opened again. Misty walked in with a smile, just in time to hear Ash's question to Miss Joy. Misty rolled her eyes, looking very angry. Xiaozhi, who told you Pikachu was dying? When will you change your impatience? You ran off before I could even finish my sentence. Who can I blame? I went because Miss Joy told me Pikachu was out of danger and told me to tell you the news. As Misty was about to say this, the relationship between them seemed to shift. She put her hands on her waist in dissatisfaction and glared at Xiaozhi, as if she would never let him go unless she explained. Xiaozhi, who told you not to stay in the hallway? I went to buy you dinner. You disappeared the moment I came back. How can you be a trainer like that? Xiaozhi was speechless after being questioned, but his head kept lowering. Okay. Xiaozhi, don't blame Xiaozhi so much. He didn't mean it. After all, he's been waiting for so long, and things are bound to get in the way, Miss Joy intervened. Chapter 898 Relaxation. After the blunder, Ash didn't rush to continue his journey, instead staying at the Pokémon Center, waiting for Pikachu to recover before embarking on another journey. Misty, however, surprisingly didn't stay at the Pokémon Center with Ash, and even agreed to go on a trip together. From previous conversations with Ash, Misty already knew he was traveling, as well as with other people she knew. However, these weren't enough reasons for Misty to go on the trip with him. The reason she asked Misty to go on the trip with Ash was because Ash had damaged his bicycle, and she wouldn't relent until he compensated her. Of course, Misty said the same thing to Ash, and to others as well. However, few knew her hidden agenda. Ash and Yiyu had previously agreed that once he became stronger during his trip, they would battle Yiyu. This would allow Misty to see Yiyu, whom she hadn't seen in a long time. While Xiaozhi was resting up for Pikachu, Yiyu, having successfully obtained the Bake Gym badge, didn't rush to leave Bake City. After Miss Joy helped his Pokémon recover, Yiyu took another day to explore Bake City's historical sites and tourist attractions with his Pokémon and Serena. He also restocked supplies for his outing, and of course, did some shopping. This truly exhausted Yiyu, even forcing his Pokémon to do the hard labor. This frightened Yiyu and his Pokémon, refusing to linger in the bustling city any longer, and the next day they immediately embarked on a journey. After several days of sightseeing, Yiyu, Xiaoxu, and the other two had only just arrived at an unknown forest. After finding a spot with water and setting up camp, Yiyu and his companions began preparing lunch and Pokémon food. As usual, Air and his 3 daughters were in charge of cooking, while Yiyu performed manual labor, helping to set up the tent. The Pokémon had already been released to play outside. Some of the long-tailed foxes and others helped their trainers prepare dinner, while others played with their Pokémon. There were both wild Pokémon and Yiyu's group. Perhaps due to their usual intense training, Yiyu took advantage of this rare opportunity to give the Pokémon a break. The water-type Pokémon swam freely in the water, and several other water-resistant Pokémon also enjoyed a comfortable swim. After all, finding water along the way was truly rare. Furthermore, the stream Yiyu and his companions had found was so clear that one could even see the water-type Pokémon swimming in it from above. Suicune and other clean-loving Pokémon simply washed themselves in the stream. Flying Pokémon like Buzzbot and Flamahawk darted through the forest, enjoying the freedom of soaring through the vast sky. As for Yu's newly captured legendary beast, Moltres, was it also capable of flight? Why wasn't it among them? Moltres was simply too proud, usually confined to the lava fields. Suddenly, it felt a bit uncomfortable being outside, so it simply lay in a sunny, open area, basking in the sun. Its lazy expression was quite enjoyable. Of course, there were a few exceptions. For example, the mischievous Snorlax and Ditto didn't help out, nor did they go play with the other Pokémon at the piano store. Instead, they spent almost the entire time following Serena and the other two, ensuring their appetites were satisfied. "Give me the hammer next to Pikachu Jang," Yu instructed Pikachu, who was standing by to help him, while working on his task. With the help of Pikachu and some Pokémon who occasionally stopped by to check in and lend a hand, Yu quickly set up their campsite for the day. Although it was still midday and the sun was at its peak, it wasn't quite time for nighttime camping. But the scenery was so beautiful. Therefore, with the approval of Serena and the other two, they decided to rest here for the day, just to relax. After all, they had been traveling for so long, and their nerves were exhausted. It was time to relax. It would also allow them to recuperate and make adjustments for the final preparations. This was a great opportunity for both Yu and Serena. After all, considering the distance, Serena and Air were almost at the venue for the Masters high-level competition. For those aspiring to become the Kalos Queen, it will be another fierce battle. To do this, they must first adjust their form and fully prepare for the upcoming Masters high-level tournament. As for Yu, after accompanying Air and Serena through the Masters high-level tournament, they will reach their next gym once they successfully obtain the gym badge for their next gym. They will be qualified to compete in the Kalos League tournament. So, the journey ahead will be no easy task. The obstacles they face will be numerous and challenging. After all, the final gym is certainly no easy challenge either. Furthermore, after the gym tournament, the true league tournament will begin. The league tournament will be different from the gym tournament, a small-scale event. It will be a gathering of true masters from all corners. Only then will the hidden talents of all factions emerge, vying for the championship and glory. That's when you really can't afford to slack off, because you never know if a single mistake could lead to an irreversible situation. Some radical individuals even start adjusting their Pokémon status in advance. Chapter 899 Water Battle. Compared to those with more aggressive attitudes, Yu's attitude was much calmer. Although he usually trained his Pokémon whenever he had time, he always managed to maintain a balance between intensity and relaxation, just like now, allowing them to relax collectively. Okay, the tent's set up here. Pikachu, let's go see if Xiaoxia has anything delicious. I'm really hungry after all this time. Stretching comfortably, Yu felt more relaxed than ever. Pika the Pikachu next to him seemed equally excited. With a simple leap, it landed on Yu's shoulder. Was Yu used to this scene? Instead, he subconsciously reached out to hold Pikachu's body to prevent it from falling. To finish, Yu extended his palm and gave Pikachu a loving rub on the head. Wow, what delicious food are you guys cooking? It smells so good. I can smell it from way off. Yu's nose twitched, and with surprise, he approached Serena and the other two busy girls. Of course, with such beautiful scenery, we have to make some delicious food. Xiaoxia, who was preparing the next meal for the Pokémon, looked up and chuckled in response. Xiaoxia was flanked by two food-loving Pokémon, Snorlax and Ditto. These two weren't playing around, nor were they hanging out with the other Pokémon. They were simply following Xiaoxia around. Of course, they weren't doing this to help, but simply to eat. Now, their big eyes blinked longingly at Xiaoxia, looking pitiful and helpless. They hoped their appearance would earn Xiaoxia's sympathy, so they'd get more Pokémon food. Xiaoxia was incredibly caring towards the two Pokémon, preparing delicious Pokémon food while also tossing some into their mouths. Hey, fried chicken legs are my favorite, Yu exclaimed in surprise, reaching out to grab the chicken leg on the table. However, before his hand could even touch it, it was instantly ripped apart by a hand. Huh? Confused, he glanced over to see Serena, hands on her hips, glaring at him fiercely. Yu, wash your hands before you eat. Okay, I'll go. Though he was reluctant, eager to savor the delicious food right away, Serena's glare forced him to withdraw his hands and wash his hands at the stream. Pikachu, Let's go wash our hands and enjoy the food. Arriving at the stream, a group of Pokemon were playing and splashing, sending up waves of water. The sounds of Pokemon's laughter and playfulness echoed. "Oh, Gyarados, you're having fun, Pikachu." As you reached the west side, he immediately noticed the most striking figure in the stream, Gyarados. At that moment, Gyarados was like a powerful aquatic king, its body twisting and turning, creating vast waves. Upon seeing its trainer arrive, Gyarados in the water seemed to be showing off its strength, like a child trying to impress its parents. It twisted its body motionlessly, stamping it in the water, then suddenly rising. As its massive body leaped from the water, raindrops fell like scattering flowers from the sky. In a matter of seconds, Yu and Pikachu, who had just reached the stream and were about to wash their hands, were drenched, becoming drowned rats. Seeing this, Gyarados immediately panicked. It was over. It was a big deal. He'd actually reduced his master and boss to this state. Would he be beaten afterward? Gyarados, now a distant king, no longer possessed the aquatic dominance he had shown earlier. He trembled, like a child who had done something wrong. As if to diminish its presence, he silently began to submerge himself. But Gyarados was simply too massive. How could the shallow stream contain Gyarados' massive form? Even if Gyarados dodged, most of its body would still be exposed. Seeing this, Yu felt both angry and amused. Gyarados was truly a fool. Pikachu Giant Claw, the surrounding Pokemon erupted in laughter at the sight. The small area between the historical and ahistorical spaces suddenly became a sea of joy. Every Pokemon's face was filled with joyful smiles. He glanced at his soaking wet clothes. Yu shook his head. He was no longer in the mood to wash his hands and enjoy the delicious food. A plan suddenly formed in his mind. "Hey, Pikachu, this is a rare opportunity. Let's go play in the water." Yu smiled at Pikachu, and without waiting for its consent, he jumped into the stream, where the Pokemon were playing and frolicking. "How, Gyarados, hurry up and get out of here. Didn't you seem so happy splashing water on us just now? Take my dragon tail." As soon as he entered the stream, Yu aimed directly at Gyarados. His helper launched like a furious propeller, sending sprays of water hurtling towards Gyarados. Despite the loud, silent attack, Gyarados didn't seem to mind. After all, its defense was formidable. "I'm really feeling very uncomfortable like this." It's not its nature to only defend and not attack, but it seemed like it had just done something wrong, and I was afraid it would do something bad next time, get my trainer, and then make things difficult for me. So what could Gyarados do? Of course, I could only hold back. It was precisely because of Gyarados' stance that the surrounding Pokemon, who had previously been bullied by it, suddenly brightened and joined the fray. Gyarados suddenly became the target of everyone's criticism, and could only silently turn his back, aggrieved, becoming a giant human target. Pikachu, seeing his trainer already rushing in, Pikachu naturally wouldn't be left behind. Chapter 900, Gun Shoots Like a Dragon. In an unnamed forest somewhere in the Kalos region, at a campsite set up by a stream, laughter and chatter echoed endlessly above. Serena and the other two girls didn't join in the fun, each minding their own business, preparing food. It was soon ready. Happy times fly by, and lunchtime was almost here. "Yu, come and eat," Serena called out to Yu, who was happily playing with his Pokemon. "Okay, got it," Yu replied, and he quickly returned to shore with his Pokemon. As he and his Pokemon took their places at the table, Xiaoxu brought out the last course. "Who's coming out?" Just as everyone was about to enjoy their meal, Yu suddenly stood up from his chair. His gaze fixed sharply on a specific spot. Furthermore, with a flick of his hand, a Yajiao gun appeared in his hand, tightly gripped. Faced with Yu's sudden action, Serena and the others were a bit stunned. They couldn't understand why everything had suddenly become like this, having been fine just a moment ago. But their confusion didn't matter. Out of their immense trust in Yu, they reacted swiftly. They all stood up, back to back, their eyes wary of where Yu was looking. The Pokemon that had already begun to devour their Pokemon food, no longer caring about the food they'd already bitten into, stood in a defensive line, shielding their trainers behind them. Several powerful Pokemon were already poised to strike. Seeing no movement in the direction he was looking, Yu didn't think he was hallucinating. After all, as a Grandmaster level warrior, he was acutely aware of his surroundings, especially those hostile gazes. He hadn't noticed anything before, but just as they were about to start eating, He suddenly felt a faint, hostile gaze. Yu had to be on guard. After all, he wasn't just looking at one person, he was also watching a whole host of Pokemon and the lives of Serena and the other two girls. Why aren't you coming out yet? Are you really going to force me to take action? Yu's voice rang out, cold and emotionless. A gentle breeze caressed her cheeks, and beneath her hair, her eyes were cold and emotionless. The breeze also swept through the entire forest, rustling the leaves. The forest was filled with the fragrance of nature. However, where they looked, there was still no movement, as if there really was no movement there. Alright, it seems you really want to force me to take action. If that's the case, then I won't be polite. The coldness in Yu's eyes deepened, and the grip on the Yageo spear increased. The breeze blew, and a leaf was blown by from nowhere. A shadow flashed by, and the leaf was quickly grasped between Yu's fingers. Then, even faster, he launched it outward. The thin leaf seemed to transform into a force capable of slicing through the heavens and earth. Where the leaf passed, the air crackled, slicing the surrounding air. The leaf remained poised, even as a few leaves, blown by the wind, blocked its path. But a flash of white light passed through the obstructing leaves, severing them in half, some even shattering into dust. The leaf shot out with incredible speed. In just a few breaths, like a sword, it latched onto a tree. The leaf swayed, leaving only half of its surface exposed, a testament to the terrifying force that had penetrated the wood. But after all this, calm returned, as if nothing had happened again. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and the leaves swayed continuously. From time to time, the cries of bug-type Pokemon could be heard from the forest, or the silhouettes of flying-type Pokemon soared overhead. Everything seemed restless, as if Yu was simply being paranoid. However, Yu's eyes narrowed slightly, a terrifying aura brewing within them as his gaze shifted. If you don't accept my offer, then I'll force you out. Just now, despite the opponent's swiftness, Yu had still seen through his trick. Pikachu, use 100,000 volts in the direction of 3 o'clock. Because of the jungle, Yu couldn't let Charizard and Moltres, the higher-level Pokemon, use their abilities, fearing they might set the jungle ablaze. But even if only Pikachu unleashed 100,000 volts, its power was astonishing, and its speed was incredibly fast, like real lightning. The 100,000 volts swiftly struck in the direction Yu had just exploded. Unlike Yu's previous display of injuring even a single flower or tree, the 100,000 volt surge seemed even more ferocious, as if its unbridled force destroyed everything it passed through. This time, the 100,000 volt surge wasn't aimed at the trees like Yu had just targeted. Instead, it targeted a relatively large rock. The rock appeared incredibly solid, but at that moment, the 100,000 volt surge shattered it in an instant. In the instant the rock shattered, a dark figure darted out from nowhere. Its figure, looking exceptionally disheveled, slammed heavily to the ground. Upon seeing this figure, Yu no longer hesitated. He didn't issue an attack command to Pikachu, nor did he mobilize his Pokemon to attack. He simply stomped his foot against the ground, like a swooping panther, brimming with swiftness and ferocity. The slightly raised Yageo spear in his hand flashed with tiny flashes of cold light. There was indeed a flash of cold light first, and then the gun shot out like a dragon. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.